Laura and Will joined them, and they spent a few minutes reading and praying together. The boys offered simple prayers, thanking God that their mom was safe, hoping no one was hurt in the storm, and telling God they loved him. They all said amen together to wrap up their worship with the Lord's Prayer. After the short service, Tim put away the Bible and book of prayer. He told the boys they were going to play at a park and then get something to eat. Although he still felt angry after hearing the boys pray for their mother, Tim decided to focus on finding out if she was okay. He tried calling Andy, but the line was busy, showing they still had no service. The adults dressed warmly and took the boys to Landa Park to play. Laura stayed close to the boys, worried they might run too fast towards the river. Meanwhile, the men shared stories from their childhood in South Texas. When the boys came running up to say they were hungry, Tim offered to take everyone out for lunch at a place that had a children's menu. They chose their favorite, Krause's Beer Garden and Cafe. On the way back to Will and Laura's house, they stopped by Carl's store. Tim picked up some developed film and videos. Carl warned Tim not to watch the videos, saying, "You already have what you need for custody, and seeing these will just upset you. I didn't watch them, but I checked the copies and just don't watch them." Tim thanked Carl, promising to consider his advice. But he knew he would watch all the tapes, even the ones without his wife. He felt he needed to gather as much information as possible to prepare for what was coming. As they drove home, they talked about nothing serious, each person trying to ignore the obvious issue sitting in the back of the truck. When they entered the house, the phone was ringing. Laura answered and handed the phone to Tim, whispering, "It's Andy." Tim greeted his friend and counselor, then turned to the boys, saying, "They found Mommy and she's okay. She got so cold that she caught the flu and needs some medicine and rest. So we will stay away from home for a few days because she doesn't want us to get sick." The boys celebrated, and Laura took them into the living room, gave them some toys to play with, and then went back to Will. They watched their friend's face as he listened, trying to understand how he felt about what he was hearing. But his expression stayed calm until a small smile appeared. "Wow, it's almost like karma. What does the sheriff's office think happened?" Tim asked, then stayed quiet for a few minutes. "The fire department, PEC, the insurance people, everyone agrees?" Will saw that his friend looked pleased when he heard Andy's answer. "Did they say anything about the trucks, Andy?" Tim fell silent again, but a smile was on his face. His expression changed to one of curiosity, and maybe some controlled anger. The anger became clearer as Andy continued to speak. Finally, Tim couldn't hold back anymore. "So that's her story? Does she think I'm a fool? I know she's been tricking me for months, but really? She couldn't think of something better? She has no respect for me. Well, she's about to get a reality check, and her friends will too." Laura looked at Will, shook her head, and whispered, "Remember that night you had too much tequila and told me stories about Tim, the Tasajio group, the troubles, and all that? Was it true?" Will nodded, closed his eyes, and put his hands in front of his chest like he was praying. Tim's voice showed he was close to losing his temper when he spoke to Andy again. "Look, I'll be calm by tomorrow afternoon when we meet with her. I can't promise anything if I see her friends at school, but I'll take some deep breaths and do yoga or something before I go in tomorrow. In the morning, I'll handle the banking stuff and stop by before work so you can help me relax if I'm still upset." Andy started speaking again, and Tim listened quietly for a few minutes before firmly stating, "Oh, we are going to file the papers. Seriously? We can't go back from this, and I want full custody of my sons. We'll deal with the others later, but tomorrow is all about her." Andy continued talking, and Tim reluctantly agreed that they should take it slow to catch everyone. He told him to hire whoever was needed, and then they hung up. Will raised his hands and looked at Tim, asking, "So?" Tim made sure his boys were busy, then shared the story the police had told Andy. Will sat in amazement for a moment after the story ended, then asked, "So they decided it was all an act of God? Since everything was burned up, there's no proof of anything else, am I right?" Tim nodded, a sly grin crossing his face, and they both burst into laughter again. Will chuckled. "Well, at least you didn't go after them when they ran out the front to escape the fire." This made them laugh even harder. Laura watched them with curiosity until they calmed down. "Should I ask if maybe the weather wasn't the only reason for what happened Friday night?" "No, don't ask that! her husband replied with a laugh, making both men break into giggles once more. Laura thought about how she could get Will to share the real story later, so she changed the subject and asked Tim to tell her what Andy said next. He recounted Andy's visit with Karen and her version of events. Laura looked at him skeptically. That sounds kind of believable. Why do you think it's not? Tim assured her he had his reasons, and those reasons would come into play if she kept lying. Laura, I plan to make my unfaithful wife my ex-wife as soon as I can, and I will deal with the others involved. Just be patient, and I'll keep you both in the loop. Unfortunately, since I'm enjoying my time and the beauty around here, Tim said, looking at her warmly, we need to head back. I'll get a hotel room near my bank and my lawyer. I've got a lot to handle tomorrow morning. His friends were a bit let down, but helped him gather his things and buckle his sons into the back seat. He and Will hugged before he turned to Laura, gave her a kind hug and a gentle kiss, telling her to be easy on Will and reminding her that he was just a call away if she needed extra help. She laughed, playfully tapped him on the arm, and moved over to embrace her husband. He's more capable than he looks. I think we'll be okay, but he has your number if we need help. Will joked that he would give it his all and hoped it would be enough. Tim pulled away, grateful for such wonderful friends, willing to set aside any past issues with Will and Karen. Sunday, Andy. On the drive home after seeing Karen, Andy felt a mix of guilt and reflection about what had just happened. He knew he was being drawn in, and he understood why, but she was so captivating that he almost lost his resolve. He thought about how beautiful she was and the wonderful relationship he and Tim had before. He started to question the plans they had made in a moment of anger. Putting aside his worries, he gathered all the information Tim needed from the police. The electricity and phones were working, so he called Tim as soon as he got home. Even though he was prepared for the talk, he felt really nervous and confused. He shared what the police discovered when they arrived. Burned buildings, downed power lines, and 8 people who were almost frozen. He told Tim that the police believed it was a storm-related incident. This conclusion came from the sheriff's department working with the fire department and the electricity company. They based their findings on the evidence. A downed power line, 4 cars burned down to just their metal frames, the remains of a shed, and a pile of ashes where a house used to stand. The physical evidence matched the owner's story, so the authorities moved on to the many other decisions they had to make after the storm. The evidence was convincing enough that even the insurance investigator was satisfied. Tim shrugged and said it was karma. Andy replied that the fire might have been unfortunate, but the conclusion was both good and bad. It was good because he didn't have to worry about being arrested, but bad because it complicated things with the photos and videos he had. How could he explain them? Tim ignored this concern and focused on his plan for revenge. Andy warned Tim not to let his anger take over his judgment. He asked if Tim was sure he wanted to go through with the plans and the divorce. Andy reminded him that they had a strong and loving relationship, and that she was the mother of his children. With counseling, she might overcome her issues, and they could return to their happy marriage. Andy said, "Look, Tim, I've never gotten over my divorce, and I don't want you to feel the same pain I have every day. Maybe if I had stayed calm and listened, I could have saved my marriage. I don't want that to happen to you." Tim flatly rejected the idea and told Andy to prepare the divorce papers so he could sign and file them the next day. Andy sighed and told Tim plainly that if he wanted to go down that path, he needed to hire a private investigator to keep an eye on their home and phone. Without the option of using videos, the investigator would have to find solid proof of her ongoing misbehavior. They needed strong evidence if Tim wanted to have primary custody of the boys. He explained that it was important to gather this information before he filed any documents that would cause a big uproar, even bigger than the winter storm that brought all of this to light. Andy said he knew just the right person for the job, and he might be able to get Tim a discount, though the investigator could be costly. Tim quickly agreed and asked Andy to arrange a meeting with the investigator after their meeting tomorrow morning. Andy suggested that Tim go home and talk to his wife, but Tim said he wasn't ready for that. As Andy tried to finish the revised documents, thoughts of Karen filled his mind. He realized he wouldn't be able to concentrate with her memory distracting him, so he stepped into his bedroom. He lay on his sheets, remembering the woman he had longed for since they first met, and who had recently shared an intimate moment with him. Overwhelmed with emotion, he made a decision about his next steps and called the woman he believed was the best family law attorney in the area, Patricia Houseman. Monday. At 8:15 the next morning, Tim took his sons to the daycare center near their motel, got them comfortable, and then headed to the nearby bank. He separated their funds into his and hers accounts and canceled their bank credit card. They had two $5,000 certificates of deposit, so he removed Karen from one and himself from the other. After the bank, he went to Andy's house, planning to review and sign the necessary documents, making sure Andy knew he was serious today. To his surprise, a very attractive woman, around 40 to 45 years old, was sitting with Andy. "Tim, let me introduce you to Patricia Houseman. She and her husband Jimmy are among my best friends, and she's the best family law attorney in the state. She will also be representing you in your divorce." Tim looked confused, so Patricia explained. "Without breaching confidentiality, Andy shared the basics of your situation with me last night and asked for my assistance because it is quite complicated. If you agree, Andy will manage matters concerning the men involved, while I will take care of anything related to your wife. You'll receive better representation for the same cost, and Andy won't be stuck in the middle between you and your wife. How does that sound?" Tim nodded and glanced at Andy, who seemed uneasy despite his calm appearance. "I assume the privilege still applies to Andy and you, Mrs. Houseman." "Please call me Patty." "Yes, it does. Andy, could you step out for a few minutes while Mr. Kelly tells me about his situation?" Andy left, and Tim took about 20 minutes to share his story as Patty asked questions to understand better. Andy knocked on the door and informed them that the private investigator would arrive at Tim's house in 10 minutes. Patty said she would represent Tim in the afternoon meeting with his wife, which would still be held in Andy's home office. Tim thanked her for joining my team and turned to Andy. "I could see she had an effect on you when you called yesterday. I need to ask, do I need to add your name to the list? Because if I do, that could be a conflict of interest for you to represent me against her other partners." Andy looked surprised and then flushed. After a moment, he met Tim's gaze and replied, "No, but she is quite tempting. We can discuss it later. Right now, you should meet the investigator and his assistant at your house. They should be there in 5 minutes, so please let them in, learn how to use the equipment, and then go on to work. We need today to go as smoothly as possible, so try not to cause any trouble at work that we will have to deal with." Tim had a quick trip to the high school, giving him at least 20 minutes to work with the private investigator and the technician. On Sunday afternoon, Tim told Chet, the assistant principal and his close friend, that he wouldn't arrive until after 11:30. Chet mentioned that school would start at 10, so he would cover Tim's only class that morning since there was no teacher for the suspension center. Tim promised to be there for the athletics period and asked if Chet could meet him in the coach's office when he arrived at 11:40. Chet agreed without asking for details, but jokingly asked if he needed to bring his baseball bat or his gun. Tim answered, "If they say anything, you'll need both to drag me away from a couple of those troublemakers." Tim needed the full 20 minutes to meet with the technicians and show them around the house so they could set up their equipment discreetly. He also needed to learn how to manage the recordings. After checking in at the school office, Tim and Chet walked to the coach's offices and locker room. As Tim passed by Steve's office, he noticed JW and Frank inside, so Chet went in to chat while Tim continued to the locker area, greeted the other coaches, and got ready for the athletics period. Chet and Frank left when the coaches gathered the students, gave them instructions, and sent the linemen to the weight room, while the backs and receivers went outside for drills on agility, speed, and skills. Tim and 2 other coaches took the players outside, while Rogers, Slaughter, and a new coach hired this year headed with the linemen to the weight room. Tim led the players through drills, helping them improve their skills and learn their plays. After the workout, everyone changed back into their regular clothes and rushed to lunch. Tim was chatting with his friend Gary about the storm when Slaughter called out to him just before he left the building. Coach Kelly, can I speak with you for a moment? Come into my office." Tim told Gary, "Please hurry and tell Chet to come back here quickly." Gary ran off and Tim walked into Slaughter's office. Inside were Robertson and Hughes. Slaughter pointed to a chair, but Tim chose to sit on the couch instead. He moved some newspapers from his seat, carefully hidden a recorder in them, and folded the papers back up. "Coach, we heard you weren't home to greet your wife when we got back, and we want to clear things up," Slaughter said earnestly. "The trip was a last-minute decision. I wanted to be there for the game to help if you won and got a playoff. JW offered to drive, and we thought it would be nice to invite your wife, just in case it was the last game of the season. She agreed to come, and we arranged for a babysitter. We should have paid more attention to the weather, but we were in a hurry to catch some of the earlier games and let Karen spend time with you." Tim stared at Slaughter, his expression unchanging and intense. When Slaughter paused, Rogers continued. "We almost made it there before we found out the games were canceled, so we turned back. On our way home, we stopped to check on some friends who were at our house for a poker game. We were supposed to join them, but they went ahead and started playing anyway. We thought we had enough time before the storm hit, so we were all at the house watching them play and having a drink when everything went wrong. The power went out, and our cars caught fire from a short circuit. When the fire started spreading, we ran to the boathouse and had a rough night there, almost freezing. Karen was in a light dress, so we gave her some extra blankets, but she still got sick and had to spend the night in the hospital because you weren't home," Rogers said, looking at him. Hughes added, "Tim, I have great respect for your wife. She's the best teacher I know. You have to believe us. Nothing wrong happened between her and us. It was all innocent." Tim stayed calm while looking at each man, seeing the lies in their eyes. Chet knocked and walked in. "What's up, guys?" he asked. Tim responded, "They just assured me that they did nothing inappropriate with my wife when they all spent the night together on Friday. As Frank said, it was all innocent." Chet noted, "You look a little unsure, Tim." "You know, guys," Tim said, tilting his head, "when I got home and found a babysitter instead of my wife, I got a bit upset and suspicious. I drove around for a while until the blizzard hit. When she didn't come home overnight, my worries grew. I decided to take my sons to stay with family that had electricity. When I learned on Sunday around noon that my wife had been found with you three, as well as Joe Ward, school board members Benton and Allen, and Jeannie Barnes's husband, I tried to think of reasons other than the obvious. Then the questions came. Would this group of coaches, administrators, and school board members actually cross a line with my wife? Would they be that careless? This made me wonder, are they really people who would act like that? We're talking about professional school staff, a lawyer, a realtor, a city official, married individuals. Would they do something wrong? To ease my mind, I thought about what I knew of each man's character, job history, and marriage. Honestly, that didn't help my concerns at all. Next, I thought, knowing who I am, would they really be reckless enough to hurt my wife? The problem is, I realized none of you know me well enough to know what I'm capable of. That didn't offer me any comfort either. Finally, I asked myself if they were foolish enough to take such a risk, knowing it could cost them their jobs, possibly their licenses, and likely harm their marriages and the reputations of the others. I decided I couldn't answer that question because I wasn't sure how reckless they might be, or if they believed they could get away with it. The expressions on the faces of the men shifted from friendly to very concerned. With a mix of disgust and anger on his face, Tim stood up. I'm meeting with my wife, her lawyer, and my lawyers this afternoon. I'll hear what she has to say and decide from there. Just understand this. If you are lying, the difficulties you faced on Friday will feel like a light rain compared to the serious trouble that is coming. With that, he told Chet, let's go, and stepped outside. Once they were outside, Chet asked, what is the name of the storm that's about to hit Central Texas? Tim replied, it's the first and worst of the season, Abaddon, the angel of death and destruction. Chet stayed quiet for a while as they walked back to campus. He touched Tim's arm and warned, remember, this isn't South Texas with all those small creeks and ponds. Tim answered, no, but it has one really big, deep lake. Chet laughed. What were they thinking? Especially Karen. That group might be the least appealing I've ever seen. Well, except for that guy married to Jeannie. Speaking of which, she called in sick today. She said she would be out for several days, maybe all week. Something in Chet's tone made Tim turn to him and ask, all week? Did she say why? Yes, Chet replied while looking straight ahead. She said she fell at home and hurt herself. They walked in silence for a moment, approaching the school when Tim asked, "You're thinking what I'm thinking, right? She confronted him and he hurt her. Do you still have your boat at your place? Maybe he will be the first to swim in the deep part of Lake Travis with some extra weight." Chet laughed and patted Tim on the back. "You might want to gather a few more facts before you act on that. But seriously, when you're ready, you have to tell me the real story about the storm survivors and their adventure." Tim promised he would, then headed to his classroom for his afternoon AP biology class. After class, he went to the gym parking lot to meet Sharon. She had most of the information he needed, except one detail. "Mary Perry refused, Coach. She said she didn't want to get involved, but everyone knows why. She has had a crush on Coach Rogers since he got divorced. Anyway, we included the night she was there. Everyone else wrote down the times they babysat for your kids, who hired them, how they got there and back, and anyone they saw with your wife, just as you asked." She looked at him eagerly while speaking. He replied with appreciation. She smiled at him and quietly promised, "Anything for you, Coach." She tossed her long blonde hair, turned, and glanced back to see if he was watching, walking back to her car. She was wearing a very stylish dress, and he couldn't help but keep looking. She was truly lovely, smart, and had a special charm. All he needed to do was ask. He sighed and called himself foolish before heading to his truck. Slaughter's car was at the office, so he drove by the field house and picked up his recorder from a folded newspaper. His wife had let him know she could leave work early today, so he got ready to meet her at 3 o'clock. Before the meeting, Tim spoke with Patty again. He told her he wanted Karen to share her story in front of everyone. If she wasn't willing to do that, he said he wouldn't stay. When Patty gave him the name of Karen's lawyer, he asked her to have the lawyer confirm Karen's side of the story, if possible. Tim made it clear he would only return home if Karen agreed to several conditions. 1, she would share where she was Friday night. 2, she would confirm she hadn't been with those men before. 3, that what she told him was true. And 4, that she would agree to health tests and counseling. They walked into a large meeting room where Karen, Barry Benton, and Andy were already sitting. Karen looked stunning in a navy blue jumpsuit that fit her well. She sat beside Benton, who didn't seem pleased to see Patty. Andy was at the head of the table, sitting right next to Karen. She had been chatting happily with Andy, but stopped to smile brightly at Tim when he and Patty entered. Tim nodded politely and greeted everyone without reaching out for handshakes. He took a seat across from Karen next to his lawyer. Karen kept smiling at him, but he chose to look away. Andy introduced everyone, even though most of them already knew each other well. He explained, "The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the events from last Friday that led to Mrs. Kelly staying out all night rather than being home with her kids and husband." Benton quickly said his client wanted to clear things up and show her husband he was wrong to take their children away instead of waiting for her to come home. He claimed this had caused her even more emotional pain after being helped. He also insisted that he could support her story because he was present during the events. Patty jumped in, saying, "Then I assume neither of you mind if we record this conversation. My client has heard one version from the police and another from Coaches Rogers and Slaughter, along with Frank Hughes, the principal where Mrs. Kelly works. He wants to listen to his wife's side and be able to think it over later in case he missed anything. So he would like this meeting to be recorded. I hope there are no objections." Benton frowned and began to speak. "I have not had enough time to review." But Karen interrupted him. "Of course we don't mind. The truth doesn't need to hide." Andy looked uncomfortable and Benton appeared uneasy. Patty quickly thanked everyone and started the tape recorder, noting the names of those present and that everything said would be considered on the record for legal reasons. She settled back in her chair, asked each person to introduce themselves, and said to Karen, "Please go ahead." Tim interrupted, saying, "This is Tim Kelly. Karen, as I mentioned in the note I left, I need to know certain things, and I want you to tell me the truth, all of it. You have one chance to do this. Do you understand?" Karen replied, "Oh yes, that is clear, and don't worry, I really want to explain everything so you can see how you overreacted." Patty stated, "The previous speaker was Karen Kelly for the record." Andy looked increasingly worried, and he silently urged Tim to be cautious. Tim finally spoke again. "Tim Kelly again. Karen, you don't know what I know. Before you start, understand that I know more than you realize. If you say something I know is untrue, I will seek a divorce and for temporary custody of our children. This is your only chance." Karen hesitated, glancing at Benton. He nodded, seeming to reassure her. "Tim, But Patty interrupted. "This is Karen Kelly speaking. Mrs. Kelly, you may begin." Karen started again. "Tim, it was just bad luck. JW and Steve invited me to your game. I called Sharon to babysit, and then—" As she repeated the same story she told others, Tim focused on her, searching for any sign of honesty. Unfortunately, he found nothing. When she talked about being helped, Tim looked at Andy, who was sinking in his chair. Karen finished. "So, you see, Tim, it was all a big misunderstanding. Nothing happened that you wouldn't have been okay seeing. Can you come home and bring our boys back? I want our happy life back, and I forgive you for doubting me." Andy sighed softly and lowered his head. Tim looked back at Karen and said, "Let's go over this. I asked who, and you said Rogers, Slaughter, Benton, Hughes, Ward, Allen, and Barnes. I asked what, and you said nothing happened that would have upset your husband. I asked how long, and your answer is just this one time on Friday night. And I asked why, and your answer is, what, bad luck? How about you, Mr. Benton? Please share your version of the events." Benton looked directly at him and said the things Karen mentioned about their time at the ranch were completely true. However, he added that he couldn't comment on anything that happened before since he wasn't in the truck with them. When he finished speaking, Karen said in a dismissive tone, "Well, now you know. I'm upset that you jumped to conclusions and took my sons away. But I promise I'll forgive you once you bring them back. Give me a hug and say you're sorry to me tonight." Tim looked at Benton, then at Andy, and finally at Karen with a stern expression before responding to her request. "Karen, we won't be coming home tonight or any other night. I warned you about the consequences if you lied, and you lied too many times for me to trust you again. Any love I had for you is gone." He looked away from his surprised wife to her equally shocked lawyer and said, "Why would you think I'd take you back after what you did? Do you see something in me that no one else does? I'm not going to sit back and let you behave this way." Benton went pale as Tim continued. "I've said what I needed to say. I'm leaving now, but you should expect to hear from my lawyer soon, just like you will, Mr. Benton. You might want to prepare your other clients for the same treatment because they will all be hearing from my attorney shortly. Have a good day." Tim stood up and walked down the hallway to a small office where he and his lawyer had met earlier. Patty gathered her papers and notes. Karen sat there, stunned by Tim's reaction, while Benton quietly collected his things. Karen looked at Andy and saw a look of disapproval she had never noticed before. Overwhelmed, she began to cry. Andy stood up, asked them to leave through the front door, wished them well, and made his way down the hall to join Tim and Patty. When he entered the small office, he found Tim sitting by the wall. Patty was already on the phone when she asked Tim, "So, should we file the custody and divorce papers?" Tim nodded and looked at Andy. "What about the others?" Andy asked. Tim replied, "You are the expert. As I mentioned, gaining custody of the boys is our main goal. Getting rid of the situation is urgent, and dealing with those involved is a longer-term plan. So what do you think, now or later?" Andy had some news for him. Somehow, my friend who is the president of the school board found out about the events from Friday night and had the board secretary add 2 items to the agenda for the Thursday meeting. They seem to be acting pretty normal, but if we're ready by Thursday, he plans to put all the school staff involved on leave and take action against the 2 board members. He has the board's lawyer looking into how to remove them if they don't step down. With that in mind, I suggest we wait until Friday to make our move. Tim shared half of the babysitter statements with each lawyer, mentioning that one girl wouldn't give her account. He said, "This shows it has been happening every week since just after Christmas. I'm really angry and want to make them pay, but I'll settle for making sure they can't work in education anymore. None of these people should be around kids, and I learned today that Larry's wife took the week off because she fell and hurt herself at home. We both know what really happened. I'm going to talk to her before picking up the boys, and if he did what I think he did. My husband is a good lawyer and helps people who have been mistreated," Patty added. "If he did hurt her, have her reach out to him. He will make sure she is safe and will make him pay for a long time. Here's his card." Andy stood up along with Tim, placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You were right. She's not truthful, and I couldn't advise you to get back with her. But Tim, don't let your pain and anger turn into a situation where your kids are raised by her while you're in jail. If you end up behind bars, she might get custody regardless of what she has done. Stay calm." Tim thought for a moment, shook hands with his lawyers, promised to stay composed, and left. When Tim rang Jeannie's doorbell, she didn't answer, saying she was sick and didn't want to share her illness. He reminded her that she had told the school she was hurt and warned that he would call the authorities if she didn't let him in. Finally, she opened the door a little and pleaded with him to leave. He gently but firmly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Jeannie shrank back behind the door, trying to hide. Tim felt a rush of anger when he saw that her left cheek was swollen and bruised and her eye nearly shut. He noticed other bruises on her arms and saw that she was holding her side. "That man! I can't believe him!" Tim exclaimed angrily. Jeannie quickly closed the door and said, "Please, Tim, he just lost his temper. He promised he won't do it again." "And is this the first time he's made that promise, Jeannie?" Tim asked in disbelief. Jeannie looked down and he knew the answer. "Jeannie, people don't change easily. He is hurting you, and he won't stop until he causes serious harm. You need to let someone help you, and I know the right person. Jimmy Houseman is waiting for your call. I'll dial his number. You need to tell him you want his help, and then you will share what happened. After that, I'll make sure you are safe until your lawyer can take over." Jeannie looked scared and ashamed as she shook her head. "Please, Jeannie, don't do that," Tim urged her. "Do you want to end up hurt? Do you want to live without friends or family? You have to stand up for yourself now. I'm calling, and you're going to speak." Though still upset, Jeannie took the phone when Tim gave it to her. She listened for a while, then said yes and told her attorney her story through tears. Tim felt sorry for her as she explained how worried she was when he was away from Friday to Sunday and how she confronted him when he came back, only for him to hurt her badly. Tim's pity turned to anger at the man who had treated her so cruelly, and he made a promise to himself that this man would feel the pain Jeannie had endured. After the call, Tim helped her pack a small bag and gently assisted her into his truck. He drove her to the Houseman home, where she would stay until they could file charges and get a protection order. During the drive, she hesitated. Larry was upset because I didn't believe his story about playing poker and getting stuck somewhere. I knew he was really angry because his favorite car was damaged. I told him that I had never seen him play poker and that he often made fun of people who did. I was angry that he was lying to me, so I told him I knew he had been unfaithful. That's when he lost control and hurt me. I begged him to stop, but he just kept hitting me. When I fell, he grabbed a broom and hit me with it until it broke. Then he blamed me for making him hurt me, helped me up, and insisted that I wasn't really injured and that he would take care of me. Maybe he told the truth. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe if I had just believed him. "No, Jeannie, no! Did he say anything about my wife? I didn't think so. You can't take his words seriously. Trust me when I say that nothing innocent happened that night. We are both in this together. Let me support you, and you can lean on me too. We were both betrayed badly, and then he hurt you. I'm sorry, but he is treating you badly, and you need to break free from him and his lies. I care too much to let you stay in this situation." Jeannie looked at Tim as he talked, then moved closer and rested her head on his shoulder. "I didn't know Karen was there too. I'm really sorry, Tim. I know how much you care for her, and this must be so hard for you. You're right. We need to be there for each other. I want to help you however I can. Will you let me?" Trying to lighten the mood a little, Tim replied playfully, "Well, I can think of a way you could help me, and I could help you, but it might take a couple of hours or maybe even all night. Do you have to go to your lawyers today?" Jeannie looked up at him, gave him a gentle nudge on the chest, and joked back, "I don't think my sore body would enjoy helping you like that right now. Maybe we should wait for our first time until things are less intense and I'm feeling better, okay?" Tim tilted his head to look at her closely, but she lowered hers to hide how she felt. "Jeannie, even with the bruises, your beauty shines through. I really miss seeing both of your lovely blue eyes." She smiled and tapped his chest again, this time playfully. Tim added, "The main thing I got from what you said is that you mentioned our first time. As long as you promise me there will be one in the future, I'll gladly wait." With her head still down, she mumbled something. Tim asked her to say it again, Keeping her eyes away from his, she lifted her head slightly and said, "I'll happily wait longer if you promise it will happen as soon as I'm feeling better." Her response surprised him. Despite their many talks, she had never shown any signs of wanting to take their friendship further. She seemed too dedicated to her marriage for any flirty exchanges. Yet her reply showed she had been thinking about it for a while. "That's the easiest promise I'll ever make, sweet Jeannie. Please get better soon, okay?" When they arrived at the houseman's home, Tim parked his truck and helped Jeannie with her bags. After being introduced to Patty's husband, the men were asked to wait while Patty took Jeannie to her room. Jimmy shook his head, took Tim's hand in a firm grip, and said, "Man, I'm really sorry. Since our situations are connected, Patty shared just enough about what happened to get me ready. She was the one who pushed me to take Jeannie's case and wanted your friend to stay here to keep her safe." He chuckled, let go of Tim's hand, and with a sly smile said, "Got a 20? From what I just saw, you might want me on call. I'm also a lawyer." Tim pulled out a $20 bill, handed it to Jimmy, and asked, "Where do I sign?" Jimmy laughed again and took him to their nice home office. He pulled out a document, filled in the important details, and gave it to Tim to sign. After Tim signed, Jimmy said, "Now you have a team of 2 men and 1 woman in place. I have a feeling you'll need all of us before this is over." Tim met his gaze with a serious look that showed Jimmy his deep anger. He said, "I have never let anyone disrespect me without making sure I get my respect back. I don't let anyone harm a friend without making the person who did it pay. My friends will tell you I'm a great friend, but a strong opponent. Let me make this clear. I see my wife and those men involved as my opponents, and Larry Barnes is at the top of my list. You know I was there, taking pictures and gathering evidence, but you don't know that I was well prepared or that I thought about taking stronger actions against them. Andy doesn't want me to use the pictures or tapes because it would show I was there, and the sheriff would want to look into the fire again. Let me warn you now, Jimmy. I will use the evidence I have if it helps me get full custody of my sons and make sure those people face the consequences. I will not let someone who disrespects others raise my children, and I won't allow them to get away with it. So be ready if that happens. I'll need your help, and if Jeannie's husband raises a hand to her again, I will need your help even sooner." Patty and Jeannie were standing just outside the door, listening. Jimmy noticed them, invited them in, shared that Tim was now his client too, and asked, "How much did you hear?" Patty replied, "We arrived when Tim started talking about not allowing anyone to disrespect him, so quite a lot." She turned to Tim and said, "I think we need to get Andy over here with the evidence you have. I know you have a private investigator working on the case, and you have some hidden cameras, but those can wait. Jimmy, call Andy. I'll order pizza if everyone tells me what they want, and we can start tonight." Tim said he would love to get started, but he needed to go pick up his sons. Patty insisted they should also stay at their home and offered 2 extra bedrooms for them. Tim agreed to cancel their room and went to pick up his sons. When he came back with his excited boys and all their things, Patty, Jimmy, and Jeannie showered them with attention. They made sure the boys had their favorite pizza, filled their milk glasses, and listened carefully to their stories about making new friends at daycare. When the boys noticed Jeannie's scrapes, she said she had fallen and hoped she didn't look too scary. The boys quickly hugged her and comforted her. Baby Mark promised to help with her scrapes because he wanted to be a doctor when he grew up, and his dad got him a doctor kit. He stayed close to Jeannie while Patrick entertained Jimmy and Patty. As the pizza and their busy day caught up with the boys, Tim gave them baths and got them ready for bed. After saying their prayers, he told them a story about brave knights, fierce dragons, and fair maidens, and soon they fell asleep. When he returned to the office, the others were discussing plans and options. Tim pulled out a tape recorder and another cassette tape from his briefcase. Andy was there with the audio and video recordings from the ranch before the fire. Andy greeted him, and the ladies asked if the boys were sleeping. Jimmy suggested they move to the den, where he had a big TV. Jimmy put in the video labeled KK, but Tim suggested they listen to the tape from the coaches' meeting that day. He wanted to hear how they responded to his comments before he left. The first 10 minutes showed his conversation with them, but it became more interesting after he and Chet exited. JW started to complain, saying, "That guy knows something. How could he? Frank spoke up, saying, I'm not so sure. He said he would listen to what she had to say. As long as we stick to our story, we should be fine. Steve told JW, call your brother and find out what he knows about Tim. We might be dealing with someone more dangerous than we expected, if he caused the fire. JW glanced at his watch and called his brother's office at a small but wealthy school in South Texas. Tommy, I'm glad you're at your office and not off somewhere else. We have you on speaker, is that okay? Steve and Frank are with me. Hello, guys. Are you hanging out and getting into trouble with my brother? Tommy replied. Steve said, actually, that's why we're calling. Do you have a coach on your staff who grew up with Tim Kelly? We might have a problem. I do, and he's right here, Tommy answered. JW, Frank, Steve, this is Carlos. We're on speaker now. It's just the two of us here. Carlos, great to hear you, JW said loudly. Wow, JW, you're still around? I thought a mad husband or father would have taken care of you by now, Carlos said cheerfully. You know, like the one down here tried to do. That was just a mistake, He-Man. She told me they were separated, JW responded. Steve jumped in. Carlos, let me share a story and then ask you something, okay? When Carlos nodded, Steve told his story, making sure to highlight the two explosions, the live wire, and the fire that followed. Tell me, Carlos, does that sound like your man Kelly? You mentioned the back of the house caught fire, right? That sounds like something he would be known for, but it wasn't him. How can you be sure? JW asked. Because you're still here. When Tim Kelly causes a fire, he usually goes after whoever comes out the front door or window. At least that's what my family back home says. The authorities claimed improperly stored fuel caused the fire, and the people living there moved back to Mexico. Of course, no one looked too hard for them because they were rumored to be involved with drugs. Everyone knew they were bad news, having hurt the sister of his friend and other girls too, so they just thought it was good to see them go. No bodies were ever found, so who knows? As we say around here, who knows? Well, Carlos, I'm not feeling much better, Steve replied. When did this happen? It was when he was a sophomore or junior in college, I believe. He came home from a game and found out what happened to those girls. That's when the gang formed and things started changing for the worse for bad people. The police seemed happy. Bad guys ended up hurt and then vanished, or they just disappeared. Meanwhile, girls stopped going missing. Bad drugs were no longer being sold, and shopkeepers didn't have to pay extra fees to feel safe. The police acted like nothing was going on and denied that anyone else was involved. But we know it was those guys, the rats of the brush, as they like to call themselves. Some are American, some are Mexican, but all are dangerous to cross. If it really was him, or if he finds out you're sneaking around with his old partner, I hear Panama is nice this time of year. Maybe you should think about booking some tickets just in case. There was a lot of worry in the coach's office after they ended the call. They promised to meet with everyone else after Karen, Tim, and the lawyers talked to decide on what to do next. The tape fell silent when a door opened and closed, until Tim picked it up later. Tim had been staring at the tape. When he looked up, he saw everyone else watching him closely. Tim, is that story true? Asked Jimmy. If you call the sheriff and ask him, Tim replied, he'll give you a very different story. Carlos is just adding to the story that people down there created. Jeannie agreed, saying, I find it hard to believe the kind and caring man I share coffee with every day could do such things, even if they were involved with bad people. And who knows what else they might be involved in, Patty said. I can believe it. From what I hear, that's how folks in the Big Bend and parts of South Texas deal with things the law can't or won't fix. 150 years ago, they handled problems in similar ways, even if some faced harsh punishments. Andy and Jimmy listened quietly at first, but both looked at Tim with a mix of respect and concern. Finally, Andy turned to Jeannie and said, People say Audie Murphy was one of the nicest men alive, but he was also a decorated soldier in World War II. It's hard to know what a person can do until their life or the lives of loved ones are at risk. I'm not saying Tim is like that, but being kind to you doesn't mean he can't deal with people who harm others. Jeannie seemed thoughtful as she looked at Tim. To steer the conversation away from serious topics, Tim asked, Do you want to hear more audio? We have 2 more tapes, or should we watch the video from Friday night? The video? Jeannie responded eagerly. I need to see it for myself. Andy hesitated, saying, "You both know watching that video might be tough, and the images might stick with you. If it's as bad as people say, it could change things for you." Tim replied, "For me, there's no other option left. Jeannie?" "I'm still going to see it," she said, though her expression showed she was unsure. Jimmy put in the tape titled KK3 and pressed play. They settled into their seats, eyes glued to the screen. The video started with a scene showing Karen arriving at the door in a revealing dress. JW greeted her warmly and gave her a hug. He then turned her away from the camera, showing his interest as he brought her dress up slightly. Everyone in the room watched closely, but Jimmy and Andy seemed especially focused. JW and Karen shared a kiss, and they continued into the house, capturing the moment in a way that drew everyone's attention. Jeannie and Tim were close together, and Jeannie looked up at him with admiration. Tim had promised himself to stay calm, treating this like something on TV, but the closeness they showed was tough to watch. It was obvious this was not their first time together. When Jeannie knelt on the rug, Tim felt he had to look away. Everyone else watched the scene on the screen, but Tim's gaze was drawn to Jeannie's face. Even though she looked hurt, he could feel her sadness for what he was going through. She had been through so much, knowing her husband was not faithful, yet she felt compassion for him. Tim had known for a long time that Jeannie was special, but tonight showed just how caring she truly is. Jimmy broke the silence. "Tim, I'm really sorry about all this, but can I ask a favor? Can we skip ahead to when Larry Barnes shows up? Jeannie has a meeting with a police officer soon about the injuries her husband caused her, and I think seeing what you've talked about will help her feel brave enough to take action." "Sure, I didn't know that was coming up," Tim replied, fast-forwarding the video. Jimmy said Jeannie decided this while he was with his kids, and she nodded in agreement. Tim knelt by the TV and moved the video until he saw Frank getting up from the bed. He pressed play and sat back down. Jeannie watched as her husband acted disrespectfully, cringing when he made rude remarks and turning away when he finished. Tears flowed down her cheeks, but she seemed determined now. When Larry mocked Tim, Jeannie straightened her jaw and said to Jimmy, "I'm ready. I've seen enough. He betrayed me and hurt me when I questioned him. I want him to face the consequences. I want to take my things from that house he insisted on buying, which we can't afford. Patty, please file for divorce quickly, and let's make sure he doesn't get away easy. I want everything." Jimmy added, "First, tell the officers everything he did to you and how much pain you're in. Show them your bruises. If a female officer is there, talk to her in private and show her everything. Don't hold back. You shouldn't feel ashamed about being hurt. Also, tell them about past incidents. We need him arrested and a protection order for you when he gets out." "Perfect timing," Patty said when the doorbell rang. Jimmy and Jeannie went to the front door to let the officers inside. There were 2 officers, 1 male and 1 female, along with a female EMT. They were invited into the living room, and the door was closed behind them. Meanwhile, Patty, Andy, and Tim decided to keep watching the video. Tim rewound it back to where they had skipped forward. The video showed Karen and JW together, but it was clear the scene was poorly made. The lighting was bad, the audio was unclear, and the video quality was low, even for an amateur production. The actors didn't seem too invested, and the whole thing felt very staged and awkward. Karen didn't appear to be enjoying herself, and the scene lacked any genuine emotion. When the scene ended, Karen got up and thanked the others for participating. She then walked toward the bedroom, smiling briefly at the camera before disappearing through the doorway. Inside the bedroom, another person, Frank, greeted her with a kiss. He was shirtless, but he still had his pants on. They briefly exchanged pleasantries before moving to the bed. The camera zoomed in on their interaction, but it was clear from Karen's body language that she wasn't as into it as she was pretending to be. The whole setup seemed forced, and the cameraman awkwardly switched between different angles, trying to capture everything. 2 cameras placed around the bed recorded the scene from different sides, and shadows of other people were visible in the background. The whole scene came off as staged, with no real connection between the people involved. Even when another man, Barry, appeared in the frame, the atmosphere didn't change, and Karen continued to go through the motions. The overall video gave off a sense of detachment and discomfort, with everything looking rehearsed and mechanical. It was clear that Karen was acting the part, but her expression never showed any real joy or engagement. The expression on her face was clearly one of disgust, but she thanked him before calling for a towel. Frank looked extremely stressed when he finished, pulling back and covering her stomach. Karen had some remnants on her cheek and bit her lip as she told him how nice it felt to be close to him. However, her expression told a different story. The cameraman recorded the heavier man moving toward Karen's bed and Larry taking Frank's spot. Ward was a tall and heavy man, but Larry, being younger and in better shape, looked much smaller compared to Tim, who was tall and fit. Ward's body was not very impressive. The video became strange when Tim burst into loud laughter. This lightened the mood for everyone else, and they began to laugh too. Once he calmed down, he said, "All I can say is, I must be the worst partner ever for Karen to turn to these less appealing guys for attention. Also, why would they even show off their odd bodies in public, especially on film? Is that really a thing in this industry?" Andy stopped laughing long enough to add, "They should have invited me. My appearance is a bit better." Patty was in a giggling fit and managed to say, "You both would need to show me, but my husband looks like a movie star next to those guys." Tim and Andy exchanged playful glances, stood up and walked over to Patty. "You said we would need to show you. Well, here we are. Why don't you check for yourself?" Andy teased. Patty paused her laughter, looked at them in disbelief, then glanced at the door before looking back. "Really? With 2 officers, a paramedic, and my husband here, you want me to check you out?" Tim replied, "Actually, you mentioned we would need to prove it to you, so here we are. Are you going to ask or just sit there?" The attractive attorney considered the 2 men, bit her lip, looked nervously at the door, and then back at them. After a moment, she said, "Thanks, but no thanks. I'll just take your word for it. After all, it doesn't take much for more." Tim, Patty, and Andy continued laughing while the video played until the door opened. Jimmy walked in and said, "The paramedic is worried about Jeannie's eye socket, and she wants to get some X-rays of her body. Patty, it might be a good idea for you to go with them to the hospital and bring her back if she's okay to leave." Patty grabbed her purse and coat, asking, "How is she?" "She was very brave," he replied. She was clearly a woman who had suffered greatly, but she stood tall and shared in detail the painful experience she went through on Saturday and a few other times. She also spoke about the mental and emotional hurt her husband had caused her over their 2 years of marriage. I felt like crying for her more than once, but she stayed strong and told her story clearly. She is much tougher than she appears, and even tougher than she believes she is. Tim grabbed his jacket and declared, "I'm going with you." But the 3 lawyers explained why that might not be wise. He nodded and told Patty to let Jeannie know he was on her side and to be brave. She nodded back and left. Jimmy looked tired. He suggested they watch more footage tomorrow when they would feel more awake, and Andy agreed. Tim said, "I'll watch more now, I can't sleep anyway. Will I see you both here tomorrow?" They decided to meet for dinner, get the kids settled for the night, and then discuss their plans. Tuesday was mostly quiet. Even gym class was calm, although Tim noticed some hard looks being aimed at him from JW and Steve when they thought he wasn't watching. Maybe Chet being around encouraged them to behave. Tim had already changed into his gym clothes before coming over to avoid entering the office. He felt the need for a showdown, but so far he kept his cool. Chet walked alongside Tim as they headed toward campus. "I heard you were unsure about Karen's story. I also heard you helped Jeannie escape from her tough situation and got her the help she needed." Tim agreed that was true, but credited the Housemans for encouraging her to seek help. "Interesting point of view, Tim. You know, Jimmy and I were fraternity brothers, and I introduced him to Patricia. Let's just say their story is not quite the same as yours." "What happened to client-attorney confidentiality?" Tim replied with a smile, and Chet said, "Sometimes a friend's concern comes first." Just before they got to the building, Chet paused and quietly told Tim that on Monday afternoon, the president of the school board had updated the agenda for the next meeting to include a closed session about an allegation involving the Educator Code of Conduct. After lunch, he was tasked with informing Frank Hughes, Steve Slaughter, and John William Rogers that they needed to be at the meeting and could bring their lawyer or representative. Joe Ward had been informed by the board president about an hour earlier. I thought you'd want to know, in case you want to stay away from them until after Thursday's meeting. They'll probably look to blame you rather than take responsibility. And yes, you can thank the principal for me being in gym class today and the rest of the week, I asked, and he insisted. It seems he has more connections than we realized. Tim, known for his short teaching stints, was well liked by everyone. Instead of enjoying lunch, he quickly ate a sandwich while driving to change some audio tapes at his old house. After that, he rushed back to school, taught his afternoon classes, led a brief meeting for the science team, and then hurried to pick up his sons. Following Patty's advice, his boys were at a nearby daycare in their gated neighborhood. The manager had clear instructions to let the boys go only with Tim. After picking them up, he took them to the houseman's home, where they met two girls who were about the same age as his boys, along with their friendly mom. Pretty Mom Cassie took the kids into the kitchen for snacks while Tim and Patty chatted in her office. She received the temporary custody notice after school today, and she didn't take it well. She started sobbing, but then she pulled herself together and went to yell at Frank for a good 5 minutes. His secretary, who was also involved with him, kept everyone else away, but our private investigator heard everything from outside. I won't go into detail, but the main point was that she thought they had promised her no one would find out, and she was determined to make them pay if she lost her sons. Frank responded by saying that if they stayed with their story, she could keep her kids, and that seemed to calm her down, at least for a moment. They have a meeting tonight at your house to discuss what to do next. I hope you have the new tapes ready. Tim assured her he did, expressing how curious he was about what might happen. He had a feeling his wife was going to show her anger, and he wouldn't mind hearing the audio later. The temporary custody hearing is tomorrow at 2, in front of a judge who knows both you and Barry Benton. She is familiar with us, and knows that I won't be easy to handle, so we should be fine. I want to double-check that you want us to call all 7 men to testify under oath, Patty confirmed. Tim agreed, but she cautioned that this plan might backfire if the judge believed their testimonies. Once they are on record, we can decide our next steps. I believe we will have what we need to turn the tables by then. If not, I've got more recordings in my briefcase. I'm determined that she will not get custody of my boys. If she does, you'll hear from me again when we are somewhere in Peru. Patty smiled, but reminded him, just don't mention that to your lawyer. We must respect the court. At that moment, Jimmy and Andy entered, and the 3 lawyers discussed their plans with Tim until Pretty Mom returned with all 4 kids. She and Patty took the casseroles out of the oven and called everyone to dinner at the big table in the dining room. The table was almost completely filled with vegetables, salads, casserole dishes, desserts, and drinks. Before they sat down, one of the young girls ran to the back and returned with a man Tim didn't recognize and Aunt Jeannie. She looked rough with a swollen face, stitches on her lip, and a big bandage over her left eye. Still, he noticed that some of the swelling had gone down and the bruising was changing color, which were good signs. The other 3 kids ran to her. She knelt down, grimacing from the pain of kneeling and again from the hugs she received from the children. Despite that, she managed to smile on one side of her face, which wasn't as swollen. After the hugs, she was led to the table by little Mark, who wanted her to sit next to him. Everyone else took their seats, leaving just one empty chair beside Pretty Mommy Cassie. That chair was quickly filled by the stranger, handsome Dad Eric, who was welcomed with kisses from his wife and daughters. The conversation was friendly and the meal was delicious. After French silk pie for dessert, everyone took their dirty dishes to the sink, where Patty rinsed them and Cassie loaded them into the dishwasher. The men went to the living room, and Jeannie took the kids into the extra bedroom that had been turned into a playroom. They seemed to forget about her injuries, showing how children often see past appearances and recognize kindness. Eric shared with Tim that he had been the doctor on call when they brought Jeannie into the hospital. It had been lucky he was working that day, but Jimmy had called the hospital to check on her, passing on the details Eric needed to help Jeannie get care and support. The mood shifted as Eric explained that Jeannie had 2 broken ribs and a small fracture in her eye socket, along with a mild concussion, bruised kidneys, and evidence of an old rib injury from a previous incident. Eric had provided this information to the police, who Jimmy told them had arrested Larry Barnes at his home within an hour of leaving here. He was released on bail a few hours later, but not before he was ordered to stay 1,000 feet away from his home and from Jeannie at all times to avoid jail without bail until his trial. The police officer who delivered the order called Jimmy to say Larry was quite upset about the charges and the order and that he doubted he would follow it. He mentioned that a police car would check on the house every day, but they couldn't promise her safety. It might be best for her to find a safe place to hide for a few weeks. Everyone in the room noticed how Tim's mood changed as the conversation went on. When he heard that Larry might not follow the rules, there was an unsettling look on his face. Eric asked, "Tim, Jeannie is worried about you after all you've been through. How are you feeling?" "That's just like her to care about someone else when she has been through so much," Tim replied. "I'm doing okay, or at least as well as can be expected right now. She needs to focus on getting better and getting away from that guy for good. To be honest, most people like Larry don't change. Court orders end, jail time ends, and they come back to reclaim what they think belongs to them. Unless he's gone for good, I don't know if Jeannie will ever feel safe." "Tim, you have to trust the system," Jimmy urged. "We have no proof that he will come looking for her, or that he will harm her if he does. The police are on high alert, and we will keep her safe until this is sorted out. Hopefully, once we're done with him, he'll run back home, and Jeannie will never hear from him again." "That's possible, but my fear is that he might cause serious harm before the system gets around to handling him." Tim paused, looked at Jimmy, and asked, "Let's get straight to it. Do you have any weapons here?" "Just a pistol, in a safe under the bed," Jimmy replied. "Would it be all right if I brought some of my things in? I'll keep them secure, but I don't think a gun in a safe is enough to stop someone determined if they manage to get inside," Tim said. Jimmy looked embarrassed for not realizing the danger and quickly agreed. Tim went outside to his truck. Dr. Eric watched him leave, then turned to Andy and Jimmy. "Tim is running on a lot of energy right now. We need to make sure it doesn't turn into a problem. He's right. We all know that people who have a history of hurting their partners often ignore the law. We have to stay alert. Are your alarms working, Jimmy?" "They work, but I haven't been using them. I mean, this neighborhood seems safe, but I'll call the company right now and let them know to turn everything back on." "You're right. We need to be cautious," Jimmy said. Just then, Patty and Cassie came in from the kitchen as Tim returned with his pistol, a rifle, and a shotgun. Patty looked at Jimmy, who said softly, "I'll explain." Tim placed the pistol on a shelf above the coat rack in the closet by the door, put the shotgun on a shelf in the nearby office, and carried the rifle to the pantry close to the back door. "They are all out of reach for kids who might climb, but I can get to them if needed. I keep one in my truck. Now, who here can use a gun?" Everyone raised their hand, and Tim chuckled. "I guess we are still in Texas, even here in Northwest Austin." Andy shared that Tim had a good reason to worry about how Larry or any other abusive husband would react if his wife reported him to the police and went to the hospital after his threats against her. Patty replied seriously, "I agree. We have to be careful. Those people may lash out at anyone they think helped their wife." Cassie added, "Eric, he might blame you for his arrest. We should go home, lock all the doors and windows, set the alarm, and hide a few of our guns where we can reach them easily, just like Tim did. We also need to watch for any suspicious people or cars in the neighborhood." When Cassie went to get their kids, Tim put on his jacket and tucked a small gun in his pocket. "I'll walk you ladies home if that's okay," he said to the little girls. They jumped up and down, insisting he had to see their new dollhouse. Patty said she would make sure the boys took a bath, and Tim left with the doctor and his family. The short walk was quiet, but Tim, Eric, and Cassie were all very aware of their surroundings. "It's interesting how a simple 2-block walk makes you notice everything around you in times like this," Eric said quietly. The boys were already in bed when Tim returned 20 minutes later after playing with the girls and their new dollhouse. He helped them say their night prayers and tucked them in. Jeannie smiled at him and his sons, then went to the kitchen to get a cold pack for her eyes and headed to her room. Tim went back to the living room, where the others had gathered in the TV room and were playing the audio tape from the night before. It wasn't much, just Karen crying and a phone call to JW where she talked about the meeting, Tim's cold reaction, and how he looked upset after she shared the story they had agreed on. She complained again that they had promised not to get caught and worried that Tim might know. JW tried to comfort her, but not much more was discussed. "I bet tonight's tape will be very different," Tim said firmly. "After the board meeting notice goes up, tomorrow's hearing and Larry's arrest, I bet they are already planning something in my house. Does anyone want to place a bet against me?" No one replied, and Patty suggested they watch the rest of last night's video along with another one. Tim was feeling upset and said, "No, I'm going to check things out. I'll return in about half an hour." Andy quickly looked at the others and said, "Wait, I'm coming with you. I want to see what's happening, and I don't want you to act rashly if Larry is there." Everyone agreed, and since Tim's truck was too noticeable, they decided to take Andy's car. 15 minutes and a few short conversations later, they drove by Tim's house, parked at an empty house across the street, and counted 6 cars parked there besides Karen's. Tim reached out his hand, and Andy replied that he wasn't foolish enough to bet they wouldn't be around. Feeling impatient and curious, Tim suggested they sneak closer, find out who was inside, and listen. Andy hesitated, but Tim opened the door, jumped out, and ran across the street with Andy trailing behind him, quietly complaining. They moved away from the road to a small creek and carefully went through the bushes near the house. They found a safe spot behind the chimney and then stood close to the living room windows on the south side. As they expected, everyone they worried about was there. Rogers, Slaughter, Ward, Hughes, Allen, Benton, Barnes, and Karen. Tim took several pictures with his camera using fast film, then agreed to Andy's request to leave. When they got back, Patty asked what they found out. Andy explained, "We didn't hear everything, but we did hear Karen scolding JW and the others about all their promises that Tim would never know, and she threatened to expose them if she lost custody of her kids." Benton tried to calm her down, saying that Tim was just trying to bluff them into revealing the truth and reassured her that if everyone stuck to their agreed story, no one could challenge it. She would get custody and then decide what to do with her husband. Benton then suggested that they all write statements. He said this would make it easier in court because the other lawyers could only ask questions about those statements, which would help them remember important details. Joe Ward, the group leader, warned everyone to stop arguing and stay focused. The custody hearing was set for tomorrow, and the board meeting was the next night, so everyone needed to prepare. Jeannie's husband reminded them that he was facing trial and needed their support. If not, he might feel pressured to confess to receive a lighter punishment. Benton promised him that he would help him and mentioned that they needed to stick to their story, making it seem like both Tim and Jeannie were overreacting, which led to all the trouble. Slaughter scoffed at this and told Barnes that he didn't care what happened to him because he had hurt his wife, and his foolishness could bring them all down. We left before hearing the reply since Karen and JW entered the kitchen, which overlooked where we were. "Anyway," Tim said with a smile, "if the recorder worked, we have proof against them. You 3 need to make sure they are questioned under oath and that we can play the tape once they have all testified. I have the pictures, marked with the time and date, so we can show them at my house and identify each person and their voices. If we do that, they are in trouble." No one noticed Jeannie standing in the kitchen doorway. "When you put Larry on the stand, I want to be in the front row. I want him and everyone else to see what he did to me while he lies." Everyone turned to her, surprised by the strength in her voice. Patty asked if she was sure. Jeannie replied firmly, and Patty said, "Then I'll call him after Rogers and Slaughter. He will be the first of the poker players called. That should surprise them. It might also get the judge's attention." Speaking of surprises, David and I want you, Tim, to sit in the audience when the board meeting starts with your tape recorder. We won't bring you into the private meeting right away, but knowing you are there with the tape should encourage resignations. If needed, you can come in, play the recording, and the other board members will likely take action to dismiss everyone involved. "Hey, let me know when I'm needed. I want to confront them every chance I get," Tim said excitedly. "I would love to reveal their wrong actions, and I could say that her bosses pressured Karen into cooperating with them. True or not, it would give her a chance to protect herself and hurt them. I'm sure she would seize that opportunity. I want them gone. I want them banned from teaching," he continued. So, forget about resignation. We have proof against them, so let's make sure they're held responsible. I want them completely stopped from harming teachers or children again. And we need to do the same with Larry. The city has rules too. He should be fired for what he did, so it stays on his record and affects his chances of finding good jobs in the future. Are you all with me? Let's make a move. Everyone nodded in agreement. Jeannie gave Tim a gentle side hug and said, "Thank you for taking care of me, Tim." He hugged her back softly and kissed the top of her head. Patty, Andy, and Jimmy exchanged glances, and Patty said, "You two are easy to understand. We need to keep you apart until this situation is resolved. After that, you can do what you want, but not now, all right?" They nodded in agreement but stayed close until Patty added, "Tim, the first video, KK1, is about Karen, JW, and then Steve joins in. It is quite shocking, but the discussions on it are instructive. If we play the audio, even without the video, they could lose their jobs and face legal trouble. As tough as it will be, you should watch it." Jeannie piped up, "Then I want to watch too." Patty looked at her skeptically, but Jeannie gave her a determined look. They went to the TV room, and Jimmy started the tape. Jeannie sat next to Tim and held his hand as difficult scenes played out. When Karen left after being with the two others, they mocked her husband, and Jeannie noticed Tim stiffen. She held on to him tightly, reassuring him that everything would be okay in a soft voice. It was striking to see the once beautiful cheerleader, now with a swollen and bruised face, looking after Tim with such strength. His feelings for her deepened. When the tape finished, the three lawyers discussed how they could use parts of it without putting Tim at risk. Jeannie held onto Tim's hand and rested her head on his shoulder. While Tim seemed lost in his thoughts, Jeannie gently stood up and pulled him with her. When the others looked at them, Jeannie saw Patty's disapproving glance. She firmly said, "We won't be too close in public, and we will be respectful here, but we need each other for support, so you all focus on your work. We'll see you in the morning." The others exchanged looks and smiled, seeing the brave woman Jeannie had become, a sign that her strength had returned. Hesitant but following her lead, Tim went to his room with her. "Just holding, okay? No funny business, Tim. Please?" Tim simply nodded and offered his hand with his palm up, indicating she could use the bathroom first. She told him she had already cleaned up earlier and just needed to change into her pajamas. When Tim returned in his comfortable clothes, he found Jeannie in his bed wearing soft pajamas. He looked at her and she said, "Please?" He climbed into bed, staying on his side, but soon after she moved closer, rested her head on his shoulder, and tucked herself against him with a soft sigh. All he could see was her eye patch and part of her bruised face, which made him uneasy. But he focused on the image of her that made him feel calm. "I won't lie, Jeannie. I've dreamed about having you here before, but tonight feels different. Take what you need from me, sweet one. I'm here for you however you want," he said. Jeannie murmured sleepily, "This isn't my first dream like this either, Tim. Please hold me. I need you close tonight." He kept her close, and she fell asleep quickly. He stayed awake longer, thinking about his plans for Wednesday and the wonderful person next to him before he kissed her hair gently. Tim woke up at 5:30 and found Jeannie asleep beside him. He was on his back, and she was turned towards him, resting comfortably against him. Although he felt a strong urge to pull her closer, he chose to be respectful and carefully moved away, leaving her asleep on her uninjured side. Tim quietly left the room, went through his morning routine, got dressed, and prepared for his boys before they rushed in to find him. He turned on cartoons in the living room, made breakfast, and served them green eggs and ham with toast. After getting them bundled up for the chilly morning, they headed out to the truck. Patty appeared in a light robe, reminding him to grab the tapes from the house and listen to them when he could, so she could update the presentation based on their content. She also mentioned he needed to be at the family courtroom in Georgetown by 1 for a 2 p.m. hearing, and she would like to hear the tapes as well. Tim gave her a playful wink and said she could be in his next project any time. She blushed and tightened her robe, making him laugh at her reaction. He assured her he would be on time and took his boys to the truck. After teaching his first 2 classes, Tim stopped by the principal's office to remind Mr. Jones he was taking the rest of the day off. The older man looked up, gave him a concerned expression, and said, "Good luck, son," before returning to his paperwork. Next, Tim visited Chet in his office, closing the door behind him. "What are you hearing?" he asked. "Not much, actually," Chet replied. "There isn't any gossip about your wife and the recent trouble or mentions of the board meeting agenda. In fact, only one person, the curriculum director, has brought it up. I told her that I wasn't in a position to understand what that meant. She replied that she didn't know either, and then asked what I was doing with her this weekend. After I got over my surprise at her asking me out, I said we could find something fun to do and asked what time I should pick her up. She laughed and said to come whenever I was ready on Friday night and to bring a toothbrush. So, even though this seems serious to you and the others, it doesn't seem to matter much to the everyday workers." With a more serious expression, Chet asked, "How are you handling things, and how is Jeannie?" "I'm okay, but she is having a tough time. I'm about to go gather some important information we need and pick up the rest of my gear. Speaking of gear, do you know where a guy could get a type of rifle that can't be traced? Something like a Remington 700 in 25, 06, or 300 mag caliber, perhaps?" After looking at Tim for a moment, Chet replied, "Actually, I do. Who wants to buy one?" Tim responded seriously, "I'm thinking about another trip to far west Texas next season, but I'd like to buy it now to get used to it first. You know, shooting across those canyons needs a good rifle." Chet nodded and smiled. "Will tomorrow be soon enough?" After leaving the high school, Tim passed the elementary school and saw Karen's car parked in her usual spot. He went straight home but noticed Benton's car in the driveway. Great! Karen was meeting with her lawyer at their house before the hearing. This was not good. He couldn't get the tapes now. Worried that he might lose custody without the tapes, he headed to the houseman's home and told Patty what was happening. She seemed less concerned, thinking the judge would agree with Tim's request based on the facts. But the final hearing would be much more challenging. Knowing where he, Karen, and her new partner would be, Tim called his private investigator and asked him to get the tapes, replacing them with new ones while everyone was at the courthouse. He assured Tim it would be done as soon as they left, and someone would bring the tapes to the courthouse. When Tim and his lawyer sat down at their table, Karen and Barry Benton were already at theirs, with some people sitting behind them, looking pleased to see Tim. The judge explained that the purpose of the hearing was to decide the best temporary care plans for the safety and well-being of two young children. She clarified that this is a legal process, but it would have less formality and fewer rules since the main focus is what is best for the children. After the opening statements, the judge asked Patty to present the case for Tim. Patty worked hard to show that Tim should have temporary custody of the two boys. She emphasized that his coaching responsibilities for the year were done, which meant he could pick them up early from daycare. She highlighted his strong parenting skills and his close bond with his sons. She argued that Karen had been a careless parent who often left her boys with young babysitters, some qualified and some not, while she spent time with other men. Patty pointed to a storm on a Friday as an example of how Karen's negligence could have left the boys without care for over 2 days if their reliable father had not returned. The judge was aware that Benton would call witnesses, as she had copies of their statements. She was surprised that Patty had taken on this case and was pushing it so hard, knowing it would be difficult to challenge the first-hand accounts that cleared the wife of any blame. Patty caught both the defense and the judge off guard with her next statement. "Your Honor, we just received and reviewed the statements from the men here in the courtroom. My client wishes to hear their accounts, as well as Mrs. Kelly's, from the stand. If they can clear up any misunderstandings he does not want to continue, I call John William Rogers as my first witness." As J.W. was being sworn in, the wives of Barry Benton, Frank Hughes, Joe Ward, and John Allen entered the small courtroom and sat in the back row. The expressions on the husbands' faces were quite revealing and filled with concern. It all started with a phone call from Jeannie to Frank Hughes's wife, Jamie. Jeannie wanted to talk to someone else because the story seemed suspicious. Jamie repeated what her husband had said was the truth, but Jeannie's mention of Karen being there with the men sparked the other women to come to the hearing room, clearly upset. It turned out that the men had not told their wives that Mrs. Kelly had also been at the poker game and had spent the night with them. Patty guided J.W. through the testimony they had practiced, asking questions that drew out the details they had prepared with just enough variation to sound real. Tim listened carefully, looking interested but keeping a neutral expression. After J.W., Patty called on Larry Barnes. As he took his seat and was sworn in, Jeannie Barnes limped in and carefully sat in the front row behind Tim. Seeing her condition and the angry look she gave the man on the stand, the judge noticed how pale he looked while avoiding her gaze. Her face showed a hard expression. Larry was shocked by how she looked, and his confused testimony showed it. Still, he was under oath and had to speak. Patty's next witness surprised everyone. Barry Benton. Usually calm, the lawyer appeared nervous and uncomfortable as he made objections. However, since he had already submitted a sworn statement, the judge allowed him to testify. He stumbled over his words, saying things like, "I was drinking, so I might not remember everything. Well, I'm not sure, but what I think is." Patty reminded him of his written statement a couple of times, and he began to sweat even more, his face turning red. The look of satisfaction on his wife's face made it clear to the judge how uncomfortable he was. Karen was the last witness. She was dressed simply and appropriately, trying to present herself as a good mother and wife. With a sad tone, she shared her story about being misunderstood by her husband when she had been delayed by an unexpected event. She insisted multiple times that nothing had happened to upset her husband and finished her story with tears in her eyes. The judge seemed moved, as did Tim, who called his attorney to join him before Jeannie was excused. Patty returned and started asking follow-up questions. "Miss Kelly, you claim that nothing inappropriate happened while you were with these men, is that correct?" "Yes, absolutely," Karen replied. "And this is the first time you've been with these men, correct?" Karen looked surprised but agreed. "Then can you explain why, on these dates, you arranged for babysitters for your 2 children so you could attend basketball games in other towns where your husband was coaching?" She handed a list of dates and babysitters to the judge, Karen, and also took one to Benton. Karen went pale and shot a glare at Benton before responding, "I wasn't with those men on those dates. I went shopping with other wives. I don't know where they got the idea I was going to those games." Just then, 5 of the 7 high school girls named on the list entered the courtroom and sat near the other wives. Patty returned with the statements from each babysitter and asked for them to be added to the record, offering to bring each girl to testify. Benton protested strongly, but the judge decided that Karen had opened the door with her statements. Karen continued to look more anxious but kept a confident front, even smiling at the girls. The girls looked back with anger, and Tim noticed a hint of worry on his wife's face. He quickly glanced at Benton, Slaughter, and Rogers and saw their shocked expressions were sticking around. "Miss Kelly, please read the statement from Sharon Malden about the first 2 times she babysat for you on December 27th and 28th. Karen hesitated but complied after the judge insisted. The statement revealed that Coach Rogers had asked Sharon to babysit on December 27th, saying he would take Mrs. Kelly to a basketball tournament where Mr. Kelly's team was playing. He called again the next day, and once more, she watched the boys while Mrs. Kelly attended the tournament with Coach Rogers and some parents, according to his words. Please read the rest of Miss Malden's statement, Mrs. Kelly." With a resigned look, she continued, explaining that Coach Rogers also called Sharon on that fateful Friday in February, telling her that he and Coach Slaughter would pick her up right after school to babysit, and then return her home later that night. Her statement also mentioned that Mrs. Kelly was prepared when she arrived on all 3 occasions, getting into the truck with Coach Rogers the first 2 times, and with Coaches Rogers and Slaughter the last time. "So, Miss Kelly, do you still say you went shopping with friends on those December dates?" Karen glared at the men, adjusted her dress, straightened up, and replied defiantly, "Okay, I did leave with them, but they dropped me off, and I went shopping with Beth, Coach Slaughter's wife, both times. This is just another misunderstanding." Patty looked at Karen with pity, shook her head, and told the judge that Miss Kelly was excused. Although the private investigator hadn't brought the tapes, she called her last witness, Mr. Kelly. After Tim took an oath, Patty set the scene, reviewing what happened that Friday and asking what proof he had to challenge the testimonies of many witnesses. Tim responded that he did not feel the need to counter what they said right now. Instead, he wanted to show that his wife had been careless in leaving their children with babysitters whenever his team played far away to do who knows what. He added, Your Honor, after each away game, when I spoke with my wife over breakfast, she asked how the game went, and when I inquired about her night, she said she had a quiet evening taking care of our sons. We now know that is not what happened. I have reasons to doubt the truth of the Friday night story told by these men and my wife, and I intend to show proof of their dishonesty during the divorce process and in any future custody hearings. I understand today's situation clearly. All I need to do is show that I am the better choice for taking care of my children for now. If my wife gets custody while I am away, I worry that things might not improve or could even get worse. I am concerned about the safety of my sons in her care. The judge dismissed Tim and turned to the defense team. Benton made a passionate argument and then Karen spoke again. She claimed to be a caring mother who had never done anything wrong, and she argued that she should keep the children at home while she and her husband worked through their issues. She expressed confidence that Tim's anger and doubts would fade away soon, and he would come back home. The judge did not believe her. There were too many signs that Karen had left the children with underage girls to spend time with men, and that she had lied to Tim about her actions that night. The stories from the men were inconsistent, but that would be dealt with in future hearings. The judge granted temporary custody to Tim until the next hearing, scheduled for 2 weeks later. She looked directly at Karen and explained that she was not convinced by her arguments. Karen had used babysitters many times, had not informed Tim despite his questions, and had been unclear when confronted with the babysitter's statements. Karen reacted badly, glaring at her associates, who looked back at Tim. Tim responded with a confident smile as he thought about his plans. He believed they would soon face the consequences. Benton turned to the others and said quietly, "We underestimated him. We need to think of more lasting solutions. Let's meet at my office at 7 tonight and don't let anyone else stop you. Be there." Dinner at the Houseman's was joyful. Jeannie cooked spaghetti with meat sauce and meatballs, a large salad, fresh fruit, and gelato for dessert. The atmosphere felt festive with Andy, Eric, Cassie, and their children present. After the meal, the men gathered in Jimmy's office to listen to the recordings from the previous night brought by the private investigator. As they listened, Tim's anger and concern grew. "They are unbelievable!" Tim exclaimed. "Their pride and lack of care for others is shocking." Andy spoke calmly, warning, "That's true, but did you hear the threat in what Benton said to Katie? She threatened them if she didn't get her sons back. Benton promised to help her, saying they would do whatever it took to make it happen. Rogers told her not to worry. There are multiple ways to solve problems." Those may seem like friendly reassurances or threats to you, Tim. "I hope they do come after me. They have no idea what I'm capable of," Tim exclaimed. "Just make sure your boys don't get caught in the middle, Tim," Dr. Eric advised. Tim replied, "They won't hurt the boys. Karen would protect them fiercely. If Andy's right, they will try to catch me alone, or with someone else, but not the boys." They returned to listening to the audio recordings from the phone and house. The conversation showed they had done what they denied under oath, and that they planned to create a false story before the hearing. When the tapes finished, Jimmy said, "They are in big trouble. At the hearing, Judge Williams will hear about the conspiracy and send them straight to jail for lying and planning to lie." Tim then played the video of Karen's earlier moments with JW, Steve, and Frank. By the time they finished watching, he felt completely armored against Karen's influence. At Andy's request, they focused on the upcoming Board of Trustees meeting. After discussing their options, they agreed on a plan that would lead to the dismissal of all the teachers involved and the removal of 2 board members for unethical behavior. They also developed a special strategy for Larry Barnes, aiming to not only get him fired, but also to increase the consequences he faced. Thursday started bright and sunny, matching Tim's good mood. Jeannie had again slept next to him, but this time she wore pajamas while he had on shorts and a t-shirt. They cuddled, slept, and woke up close to each other. Tim noticed that the ice and heat treatment had significantly reduced the swelling on her face over the past day, and her calm sleeping position suggested that the medicine was easing her pain. From one side, she looked like the beautiful blonde Tim knew, but from the other, her appearance was quite different. Because of this, she stayed in and away from others as much as possible, and Eric continued to visit her at home to help her recover. At the high school, Tim found out that both JW and Steve had resigned earlier that day for better-paying jobs at a wealthy school in the West Texas oil fields. Beth had also resigned to teach there, and all three were granted leaves of absence by the superintendent. Tim immediately called Andy, saying, "I won't let them leave. I want them to face the consequences. Should I file a complaint against them for breaking school rules?" Andy shared that he had already talked to David Pierce, his friend and the president of the school board. The board was set to hold a hearing about some serious issues involving Rogers, Slaughter, Hughes, Ward, Allen, and Benton, including claims of bullying and misconduct. "I hear people know you will be there and that you have proof. They even have a meeting planned at Benton's house at noon. His wife left him and is going through a divorce. Makes you feel a bit sorry for him, doesn't it?" Andy asked, with a hint of sarcasm. Tim chuckled. "So, what time should I be there?" "David will start the meeting at 7 p.m., go over the minutes and reports, and then they'll have a short private session. They'll talk about the claims and the rules, then let the board or teachers speak in private. After that, they will return to the public meeting to examine the evidence and vote. We might have to join the private session or share evidence during the public discussion." David wasn't sure what the lawyer would say. After they discuss everything, the president will welcome motions, they will vote, and then continue with the regular meeting. "Let's meet in front of the admin building at 6:30 to see when the board's lawyer wants us to speak." Tim agreed and returned to his usual routine. Chet met him at the sports center as the athletics period began. He quickly informed the athletes that coaches Slaughter and Rogers had stepped down, took some questions, and let everyone know that Coach Kelly would lead the off-season strength program. The news was met with cheers and clapping, as Coach Kelly shared his exciting plans to help them improve their skills. The workout was the most energetic that Tim, Chet, or the other coaches had seen, and Tim felt delighted by the enthusiastic support from the kids and his fellow coaches. His afternoon classes went smoothly, and he left promptly after his last class ended at 3 p.m. to pick up his sons. As he walked out of the daycare center with Mrs. Gonzalez, he held Mark in his left arm and Patrick in his right. Mrs. Gonzalez excitedly talked about a costume party coming up next week. While they stood on the sidewalk about a dozen steps from the entrance, Tim noticed a pickup truck parked across the street about half a block away. He tried to figure out why the truck caught his attention just as it began to move forward. He noticed a reflection and saw a rifle sticking out from the back window of a car nearby. In a panic, he pushed his sons away from the danger, shouted a warning, and moved the director aside. The boys were thrown in different directions when he felt a sharp pain on his left shoulder and heard a gunshot. Soon after, he felt a tug near his hip and heard another shot. Ignoring the pain, he dashed toward his truck to draw attention away from his kids. Just as he got close to his pickup, another shot rang out, missing him but hitting something behind him. He reached into the truck and pulled out his gun. Another bullet hit the windshield. He stepped out and felt something strike his leg while he aimed at the shooter. It threw him off balance, but he steadied himself and fired 3 shots into the car. The rifle vanished, and the vehicle sped away. Feeling weak, Tim leaned against the truck. He noticed blood on his shirt and pants. Turning, he saw his children being comforted by Mrs. Solis, the center director. They were crying, calling for him. He wanted to go to them, but suddenly found himself too weak to stand and fell to the ground just as a police car pulled up. Knowing his kids were safe, he let himself drift into darkness. Later, he became aware of beeping noises and voices around him. When he opened his eyes, he saw tubes and monitors connected to him. His mouth felt very dry, and his shoulder and neck hurt when he tried to move. He heard someone gasp and turned his head slowly. A hand squeezed his, and a woman exclaimed, "He's awake!" He recognized Jeannie, but she didn't have an eye patch anymore and looked much better. She seemed pretty, but Tim remembered a time when she had been hurt. He tried to speak and ask her how she was, but she gently told him to be quiet and that everyone was okay. He closed his eyes again, slipping back into darkness. When he opened his eyes next, several doctors and nurses surrounded him. He focused on the man in a white coat who was closest. Tim wanted to ask why he was there, but he couldn't get the words out due to his dry throat. A nurse in blue scrubs gave him a straw to drink a little water, then took it away. The doctor asked if Tim knew why he was in the hospital. Tim's mind felt foggy, and he couldn't understand what had happened. He croaked, "No," and the nurse offered him another sip of water. Dr. James then asked him what he could remember. Tim remembered he had a family and had been picking up his boys from daycare when something unexpected happened. But what? Suddenly, it all came back to him. He had been shot. He yelled out, "Are my sons okay?" The doctor reassured him they were fine and told him he would heal quickly, probably in a week or two. "We are all happy to see you awake," the doctor continued. "It's great that you remember the event and your sons. Those are positive signs, and we expect you to make a full recovery. There was a bit of worry because you lost a lot of blood, but you are young and strong. You have done well so far. You will need some rehab to regain your strength, but you will improve every day." "When can I see my sons?" Tim asked. The doctor and nurses exchanged glances, and Dr. James replied, "Right now, let's focus on making you stronger. We will arrange a visit when you are better." Even feeling weak, Tim sensed something was off. "Where are they? Who is with them?" "We don't have all the details about your family, Mr. Kelly. We are your medical team. Your lawyers requested that we call them when you woke up. Your sister just left to take care of some things. Nurse Phillips will let them know you are awake, and they might be able to give you the information you want." Tim nodded as the medical team started to leave. Dr. James spoke to Nurse Phillips while Tim drifted back off to sleep, wondering why his sister was here instead of with her children on the ranch. The sound of familiar voices nearby slowly brought him back. He heard a medical staff member explaining his condition. "He's still weak from the blood loss, but the wound in his leg is responding well to treatment. The others are healing nicely, but he needs plenty of rest. I can allow you 15 minutes with him, but then you will need to leave." "Can I stay? I promise not to disturb him, but I want to keep an eye on him," asked a familiar female voice. Tim opened his eyes a little and focused on the people in his room: Patty, Jimmy, Andy, and Jeannie. He found himself wondering why his wife wasn't there, but then his memory returned. The alarms around him faded as he concentrated on his friends. "It's good to see you," he croaked. "Thank you for being here." The nurse helped him drink some water, and he noticed tears in his friend's eyes. "We thought we lost you," Patty said softly. With a weak smile, Tim replied, "I'm tougher than that. Are my sons all right?" "They are, thanks to you. If you hadn't pushed them out of the way," Andy began. "Gonzalez, she and Mark might have been in serious danger. The first shot hit you in the left shoulder, very close to where Mark was, and the second grazed your hip. That one could have hit Mrs. Gonzalez. She and the police both say you're a hero." Tim brushed off the praise and asked again, "But my sons, they're okay?" "Yes, they were really shaken up, but they weren't hurt. They were mostly worried about you. Mrs. Gonzalez took them inside and made sure they were looked after while the emergency team took care of you and the police investigated. She let them watch through the window so they could see you being helped. It calmed them down a little when your wife showed up. She took them with her when the ambulance took you away." Seeing the frustration in Tim's eyes, he explained further. "I know you don't want them with her, but everything was so chaotic. She came and took them. We spoke to the police about the custody order and thought about going to the judge to stop her from taking them. We wanted to keep them for you, of course, but we knew that wasn't possible. Given the situation, we thought their mother was the best option. It was either her or state care, Tim, and the state doesn't handle traumatized kids very well. So her friends almost kill me, nearly take out Mark too, and she conveniently shows up right after to take the boys. And you think that's a good idea? Are you serious?" Tim asked, clearly upset. Ignoring Tim's question, Jimmy changed the subject. "You saw who shot at you? That's good. The police will be here soon to ask you about it. They've identified one person involved, but they're not sure who the shooter was." Tim's anger was evident, and the machines around him beeped in response. The nurse quickly ushered the attorneys out of the room, but allowed one person to stay behind if she promised to help keep Tim calm. "So, you're the one who's been staying with me day and night pretending to be my sister?" Tim asked. "That was the only way they would let me in," Jeannie replied with a smile. "Well, that's something, I guess," Tim muttered weakly. He wasn't sure if he was smiling or not, but Jeannie gave him a gentle, comforting look. "Don't worry, there's plenty of time for talking when you're feeling better," she whispered. Taking a seat next to his bed, Jeannie asked, "But seriously, how are you feeling?" "Pretty good, considering I've been shot 3 times. I think the medicine they've got me on helps a lot." There was a light knock on the door, and two tall men in suits entered. One had a badge on his belt and was holding a hat in his hand. The other showed Tim his badge and introduced himself. "Coach, you might remember me. My son is Abe. He was on your basketball team last year." Tim nodded and replied, "It's good to see you, Mr. Wellington. I wish things were different." Both men acknowledged Jeannie with a nod, and she returned the gesture. The other man introduced himself as Jim Boyd, a Texas Ranger. Tim nodded at him and said, "I would shake your hand, but I have tubes connected to both arms." "We see that," Boyd said. "Can you tell us what happened?" "I assume you know the basics," Tim started. "I went to daycare to pick up my sons. The director came outside and was talking about an upcoming party. I noticed a pickup truck parked a little down the street. It wasn't there when I arrived. It stood out on that quiet street, so I watched it as it drove toward us. The back window was open, and I saw a shiny object that looked like a gun barrel. As it got closer, I realized it was a gun pointed at us. I was holding my sons, one in each arm. I quickly moved them to the side and pushed the director away from danger. I felt a sharp pain on my shoulder and heard a loud sound. I dashed toward my truck to draw fire away from my boys and the daycare. I felt something hit my side, but I kept going. There might have been another loud sound, but if there was, it didn't hit me. I reached my truck, and as I pulled my gun from under the seat, a shot broke the windshield. I stepped out and aimed at the pickup, which was at an angle from me, but then I felt another hit in my leg. I think I fired 3 shots as the truck sped away, then turned to check on my sons. Mrs. Gonzalez was holding them in her arms on the ground. They were crying, but they appeared okay. I started toward them but stumbled and everything went dark. The next thing I remember is waking up in a room with medical staff and the sound of beeping machines. The ranger and detective exchanged glances. Then the ranger said, "You handled that very well, Mr. Kelly. It's almost as if you have training, but your records show no military or police background. Your description matches the other witnesses, one of whom was watering her plants across the street, and the other is the daycare director." "Coach, did you see the person with the gun?" Detective Wellington asked. Tim hesitated before answering. "Not really. I was focused on the barrel and the danger. I'm fairly certain it was a man with blonde hair, but I couldn't see his face clearly. I think the 2 men in the front seat had dark hair and there was another person in the back, but I only caught a glimpse." "I think it was a man too," Tim said. "Can you recognize any of them?" the detective asked. "I'm a bit foggy right now from all the medicine I'm on. I might remember better when I'm not on the painkillers, but I can't be sure," Tim explained. "Do you have any clues?" "We do, and we'll share those with you soon," the ranger replied. "But I need to ask, do you know anyone who would want to harm you?" "Actually, I do. My wife was involved with at least 7 men. When I found out, I moved out, but I had our home set up to record conversations. I heard her and her partners discussing how she wanted to get custody of our kids. I have proof that could hurt them. They even talked about taking me out to make that happen. In response, my wife told them she didn't care what they did to me, but if they didn't help her get the kids, she would make things hard for them. There's more I could say, but I need to check with my lawyers before I share anything else." Ranger Boyd said, "That's enough for now. What you've told us matches what we already know, including the names of the men." Detective Wellington added, "You might not be surprised to hear that John William Rogers borrowed the truck from a friend. That friend came forward after he noticed bullet holes in it following the incident. Rogers and 3 other men connected to your wife have gone missing. We are looking for them and keeping an eye on the others. For your safety, the sheriff has arranged for a guard to watch over you at all times, and hospital security is aware of the situation. We believe you're safe here, but please stay alert. If you see anyone acting strangely, press the call button and our guard will be there quickly. Remember, it could be someone else they hired." Tim nodded and asked, "I have a couple of questions. How could my wife, who just lost custody of our children a few hours ago, be there to take my sons right after I was shot? I'm not saying she knew I would be hurt, but it certainly seems fishy. And why does she have custody of our sons now?" The detective replied, "We found that strange too. We were told she was being comforted by a friend who was a teacher nearby after the hearing. They heard the sirens and knew your boys were at daycare, so they rushed to the scene. Her friend supports her story. Regarding custody, your friends and I discussed it. At that time, we weren't sure if you would survive. We felt your sons had already been through enough and didn't need to be placed with unfamiliar people by social services. Since the kids had to go into state care if their mom was not around, we thought it would be better for her to be with them. When she tried to take them, we all spoke with her. She said she would take them to her parents' house, which was far away, to keep them safe from everything going on. Wellington looked at Jeannie and then said to Tim, "Coach, I know you're upset with her, and you have every right to be. Your friend, who is also an officer, told me about the situation. But first, she made the right choice given what was happening. Second, I have never seen anyone so distressed. The officers had to help her so the medical team could do their job to keep you safe. She was crying, 'No, please don't leave. I need you. I love you,' over and over. I had to ask a female sergeant to help calm her down because her actions were scaring your boys even more. Mrs. Gonzalez took them inside until we could help her calm down. Once she settled, the boys relaxed too, and they wanted to go with her after the ambulance took you. Her friend said she would drive them to her parents' house since they were all too shaken to go alone. So as unhappy as you are about this, I really believe we did the right thing. When you are better and able to care for them, you can go to court. But until the ones who were after you are caught, it is safer for the boys to stay away." After they left, Tim turned to Jeannie and thanked her for being there. Jeannie looked worried as she said, "Tim, I heard what they said about watching for anyone suspicious, and I'm concerned about the night nurse who was here while you were in a coma. She was very rough with me, questioned why I was there, and seemed to dislike taking care of you. The other nurses treat you kindly and act like you're a hero, but she seemed annoyed and didn't want to check on you. It was on her shift while I was in the bathroom that you almost had a serious problem a few days after you arrived. Do you know her?" Tim said he did not remember her and wanted to be awake when Nurse Simpson came in to check on him tonight. Jeannie said she would stay in his room and keep watch while Nurse Simpson was on duty, as tonight started her 3-day shift. Tim suggested she go home and rest for now so she could stay awake later. She agreed with some hesitation and kissed his forehead gently before she left. Tim took a nap until his doctor came in the late afternoon. After checking on him, the doctor had them remove the IVs and suggested pain medication instead. He encouraged Tim to take the medication regularly because it would help him heal faster without the pain slowing him down. He turned down Tim's request to remove the catheter because Tim's leg still needed more time to heal before he could walk. However, he did say Tim was ready to start physical therapy tomorrow, which could help him get better faster. Tim replied that he was already good at using a bedpan and would surely learn to use a urine bottle. The doctor smiled, shook his head, and agreed to take out the catheter, as long as Tim promised not to do more than what the physical therapist said he could. Tim thanked him a lot, feeling grateful. Jeannie came back at 6:30, just before the nurses checked his charts. Tim saw the new nurse give Jeannie a strange look before looking at him with disapproval. Once Miss Phillips left, Tim asked Nurse Simpson, who looked serious, "Do I know you? You seem familiar?" She quickly turned to him, looking uneasy. "I don't think so. I was your nurse for several days while you were in a coma, but you probably don't remember." Tim continued, "That's odd. I feel like I've seen you around. Do you have kids in high school?" "No, I don't have any children. I'm not married and never have been." "All right, I'll keep thinking. I'm sure I've seen you somewhere, maybe with someone I know or at a store. I usually remember faces well, so it will come to me." Nurse Simpson looked a bit upset by his comment. After giving Jeannie another strange look, she left the room. Tim noticed her later at the nurse's station, talking on the phone. She didn't come back until 9 when she brought him his pain medicine and a glass of water. She also brought water for Jeannie and offered it to her with a smile that didn't seem very warm. Jeannie accepted it and took a sip. Tim took the pills and the water, swallowing them quickly. Nurse Simpson seemed satisfied, turned, and left. As soon as she was gone, Tim spat the water back into his glass through the straw and showed Jeannie the pills he still had. Jeannie did the same with her water. "What's next?" he asked. Jeannie answered, "I'll pour the water into plastic cups in the restroom and hide them in the shower. You hide the pills in your bed. Then we both pretend to be asleep. We might be wrong, but we need to stick to the plan. Something feels off with her, and we can't take chances." 10 minutes later, Nurse Simpson returned and found Tim pretending to sleep in his bed while Jeannie slouched in her chair. Simpson smiled as she took a syringe out of her pocket and rolled up Tim's sleeve. "What are you giving him?" a rough voice asked from the doorway. Surprised, Simpson quickly composed herself and said, "Just something to help him sleep. He needs to rest to get better." "That's odd," said the voice. "There's nothing in his chart about an injection. I should call the doctor for confirmation. Please hand me the syringe and take a seat over there." When she didn't respond right away, he took the syringe from her. Tim and Jeannie opened their eyes and looked at Simpson. Tim asked sharply, "Which of the shady characters are you working with? I suspect it's Jeannie's husband, Larry, but maybe Benton is paying you, or perhaps you're involved with Rogers. Which is it?" The nurse appeared frightened and said she didn't know any of those names. An orderly from the lab came with hospital security. He took the syringe, the glasses of water, and the pills for testing. The police officer and hospital security asked the nurse what they would find in the syringe. When she refused to answer, the officer told her, "You don't have to answer my questions. You have the right to remain silent," and began to read her rights. After he finished, he added, "Now that you know your rights, I believe we will find something harmful in the syringe, and something that could put both of them to sleep in the water and the pills. If we do, you could be charged with trying to harm Mr. Kelly. You would lose your nursing license and face 10 to 20 years in prison. Your best chance is to tell the truth, and we can talk to the district attorney for you. If you want a lawyer, we will take you to jail first. So, what will it be?" Simpson broke down crying for a while, then angrily shouted, "They both deserve to pay. They've been having an affair. You hurt Larry's heart, and then you lied and got him in jail. And you made up a story that got Larry, JW, and Steve fired. I might go to prison, but they will get what they deserve." Tim's temper flared for a moment. "You tell your boyfriend Larry the next time I see him he will be in trouble, and I won't miss. Got it?" Jeannie stepped closer, lowered her voice, and warned, "And if I see him first, I won't hold back." Officer Dans smiled at the tension and told her to stand. He handcuffed her and called for the police team outside to come and take her away. When the lab team entered, Detective Wellington also walked in. He thanked Tim and Jeannie for being aware and sharing their concerns. "We are increasing the guards inside, and an unmarked car will be parked outside all night. We take her threat seriously, and so should you." Tim replied, "Oh, we definitely do. Because of that, I want my gun or another one by my bed from this moment on." "Can you make that happen?" After checking to see if anyone was around, Wellington took a small firearm from his leg holster and handed it to Tim. "Keep this hidden, and please don't tell anyone where you got it." "I promise I won't, thanks," Tim replied. "Now, how is the investigation going? What do you know, and have you found anyone?" The detective answered, "Not yet, but we have alerted everyone to look for all 4 suspects. Their homes are being watched, along with their known friends. The 4 suspects are Barnes, Rogers, Slaughter, and Benton. Your wife and sons are with her parents, and the police there are making sure they are safe. They will act right away if anyone goes to their house or if Mrs. Kelly leaves. So far, only her mother has gone out, and that was just for groceries. We also got approval to listen in on the phones of all 8 suspects, including your wife, and that has started." With a serious look, Wellington asked, "Are you sure you didn't see the shooter or anyone else in that pickup? That could really help us find who did this." Kelly replied, "If I said the shooter looked a lot like Larry Barnes, but I couldn't see his face clearly, would that help? He's already a suspect, and so are the others I think were in the truck. Just give me a day or 2. If I really focus, I might remember more." Wellington said he would keep them updated and left. Jeannie asked, "Was it Larry who shot you?" Tim answered he wasn't sure, but motioned for her to come closer. He whispered, "Yes, he was the shooter. Rogers, Benton, and Slaughter were in the truck watching." He gently pushed her back and warned, "I'm worried about you too. If Larry is involved, and I think he is, he could come after you as well. He might be more angry with you than me, so please don't go anywhere without someone with you, okay?" The days went by fast with therapy twice daily and many friends coming to visit. The principal, teachers, students, some parents, his friend Chet, and the board president all stopped by. Every member of the basketball teams and many football and track athletes he had coached also came to see him. His lawyers took turns visiting, but Jeannie, his new support, stayed by his side except when she needed to freshen up. Because of a warning from Nurse Simpson, She traveled to and from the houseman's home with a pair of officers who took her inside as well. Tim's parents and siblings visited for 2 days, so the nurses knew Jeannie wasn't his sister. The head nurse asked him with a smile if it was okay for her to stay, even though she wasn't family. After that, she took on the role of a wife and was given a foldable bed and meals by the kind nurses, technicians, and helpers. The one person missing was his dear wife, who didn't come by or call. On the 4th day, Tim called his in-laws home and spoke to his father-in-law. "Good afternoon, Gramps. How are you?" "Tim, I'm fine. We have Karen and the boys here, safe from all the trouble. They are doing well, and so is Mother. The real question is, how are you? We heard you survived and are getting better, but we haven't heard anything new in a couple of days." "I don't see why you haven't heard more. Karen is listed as my spouse, so she can get updates from the nurses anytime. You, your wife, my sons, and Karen are all on my family list, so you can all come see me anytime. In fact, I want to see my sons soon. I'm up and moving now, doing physical therapy, and I'm close to being released. I think it would help them to see me doing better after what they last saw when I was hurt." Tim heard his father-in-law gasp, and when he spoke again, his voice was shaky. "We're not sure they are ready for that. They are still affected by what they witnessed. Maybe it's better to wait." "Okay, then let me talk to them and reassure them I'm fine," Tim insisted. The line grew silent for a moment, but he could hear whispering. Then his father-in-law said, "Call back tomorrow. We'll see about it then." Tim felt frustrated. "How about this instead? If you don't let me talk to my sons now, the police will be there tomorrow to take the kids and file a complaint against Karen for breaking the order, and then none of you will see them again. Which would you rather have? All I have to do is get my lawyers involved and you'll be in real trouble. Or you can let me speak to my sons and bring them to see me tomorrow. Which do you choose?" The line fell silent again, and then he heard Karen say, "Patrick, your daddy is on the phone. Would you like to talk to him?" Patrick shouted with excitement, grabbed the phone, and began speaking quickly. "Daddy, are you okay? You were hurt by bad people and you were bleeding. We were so scared and they wouldn't let us come to you. They said you might not make it. Are you all right now?" In the background, Tim could hear Mark saying, "I want to talk to my daddy too. I want to tell him I love him and I want to hug him and help him feel better." Tears filled Tim's eyes, but he responded with equal enthusiasm to Patrick. "Daddy is doing well. Those bad people hurt him and made him bleed, but he's getting better and the police will catch the bad ones. They will face consequences for a long time. Daddy wants to see his boys. When are you coming to see me?" "I have to stay here for a few more days, but soon I'll be going home to get my boys. Then we can all be together. Would you like that?" Patrick shouted. "Yes, Daddy is coming home to get us so we can all be together." "Patrick, can I speak to Mark now?" Tim asked once Patrick settled down. Mark took the phone and said seriously, "Hi, Daddy, I love you. When I come to see you, I'll bring my doctor kit and help you feel better." "Thank you, my special little one. I know you're a great doctor who can make me feel better right away. When are you coming to see me?" "When will we see Daddy, Mommy? He wants me to come help him." "Soon, baby, soon. Can I talk to Daddy now?" "Daddy, Mommy wants to talk to you now. I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Mark. Be a good boy." "Tim, can we talk?" Karen asked softly. "The boys are in the living room with Mom and Dad now." "What do you want to talk about, Karen?" Tim replied coolly. "Tim, I can't express how sorry I am about all this," Karen said, her voice shaky. He could tell she was barely holding it together, but Tim couldn't stop himself. "What exactly are you sorry for, Karen? Are you sorry for what happened to our marriage and family? Or are you sorry I found out? Are you sorry about the trouble you got into or just that it hurt me? Tell me what you are really sorry for, Karen." "All of it. Everything. I can't believe it happened, but I know it did. Would you like to see the videos, Karen?" Tim interrupted. "If you can't believe it, would you like to see what happened? Would that help you remember? Because it sure helps me remember." "Tim, how do you know about that?" Karen asked, shocked. "I warned you that I knew everything. I told you your only chance was to tell me the truth and you still lied to me. I don't know what makes me angrier, the way you acted, your lies, or how you've disrespected our marriage, but I assure you, you will regret what you've done. When I finish with you." Tim stopped because Jeannie was putting her finger to her lips and shaking her head. He realized she was reminding him that their conversation was being recorded. He had already messed up by bringing up the videos. He shouldn't say anything else that could cause trouble. Taking a deep breath, Tim spoke in a calmer tone. "I'm sorry, Karen, I lost my temper. I promise I'll calm down now. What did you really want to talk about?" "Oh, Tim, I'm such an idiot. I'm really sorry," Karen cried. "I know, Karen, I know," Tim replied. "Let's set aside your guilt for now and talk about something else. Can you bring the boys to see me tomorrow? I would really like to see them. That's what I wanted to tell you, honey. I want to, but I'm worried. The men who hurt you are still looking for you, and I fear for the boys' safety. Can't you understand? I don't mean to keep them from you, but I'm scared." "Why, Karen? How do you know they are still after me? Have you spoken to them?" Tim asked. Karen was quiet for a moment, so Tim pressed on. "If you have talked to them and don't tell me, you could get into serious trouble. That means you might not see your sons again until they are adults, if they even want to see you after so many years. Think about that. So have you talked to them? No point in lying. I can check your phone records before the next hearing, and I will tell the authorities if you have. Tim, I promise I haven't contacted them. Barry called me at home the night after you were hurt and said they had taken care of my issue. My parents were right there, so I tried to make it sound casual. I told him that you had been shot 3 times and had to have several surgeries, but you were expected to get better. He cursed and told me not to worry. They would come up with another plan. I said sincerely that I love you and am hoping you recover, and they should too." He laughed, repeated what I said, and others in the background also laughed. He said, "Sure, babe, we understand," and then he hung up. 2 days ago, they called again, and JW told me that Larry had someone at the hospital who would take care of you soon. I was alone with the boys who were playing in another room. I told him that I never wanted you hurt and that they should stop whatever they were planning. He laughed and said if I changed my mind, they would cancel it. He told me he would see me soon, and then he hung up. And then, my dear wife, I assume you called the police and reported that another attempt would happen against me, right? Tim asked, knowing the answer already. No. I told them to stop and they promised they would, she responded. Didn't they? Actually, your honest friends did try again last night, even after promising you they wouldn't. A nurse Larry was involved with tried to harm me while I was at the hospital. Have you thought yet that they might not be trusted, my loving wife? Maybe it's time for you to talk to the police and be honest. Or is there something more? After a short moment, Karen said, They called me again today to tell me their plan at the hospital didn't work, but they were going to keep trying. I was all alone and yelled at them to stop, that I don't want you hurt. I told them again that I love you and I want us to stay married and grow old together. I asked them to leave you alone. They laughed at me and said they wouldn't stop until you were hurt. They also said they would come for me soon. I told them I wouldn't go, but one of them said, Oh yes, you will, or he won't be the only one in danger. Then he mentioned that I would like Mexico. I cried and said I wouldn't go, but they hung up on me. And then you called the police, right? You were worried about our sons, so you told the police about another plan to harm someone, and that you and your family had received threats. Is that right? Tim pressed her. Karen began to cry loudly, and Tim let her take a moment before he redirected the conversation. Did you call the police about this last threatening call? Sniffing, she replied, No, I'm scared of them. If I tell the police, they might hurt me. So the people you trusted, who you left your marriage for, are now threatening you and maybe our sons and your parents if you won't go to Mexico with them. Wow, Karen, your judgment in this is shocking. What happened to the good person I married? Did they change everything about you? I just don't understand. Karen started crying again, and Tim listened for a while before saying, I'm giving you an hour to compose yourself and make the call. When I call back, I want to hear that you've talked to a police officer. And one more thing, Karen. If anything happens to my sons, there will be serious consequences for you and those with you. Do you understand? Her crying turned into wailing, and Tim raised his voice, saying, 1 hour, before he hung up. Jeannie calmly reminded Tim that their sons were being watched, and anyone approaching them would be arrested, so they were safe. She also told him that their phones were monitored, so he needed to stay calm and not make threats. He nodded, took a deep breath, and promised to do better. Just then, Andy came into the room as Tim returned from the bathroom with his walker. Jeannie hugged him and told him to take good care of her patient while she went to the houseman's to clean up. Tim reminded her to eat well, but she laughed and said she preferred the hospital food because it helped her lose weight. Tim looked her over and said, "Well, don't lose any more. You look great just like this." Jeannie rolled her eyes and waved him off as she walked out the door. The officer who was there to assist gave a sly smile and followed along. Andy and Tim watched Jeannie walk away, admiring her, and Andy said, "She really is almost perfect, isn't she? If she weren't so kind and already involved with one of my friends, I would be thinking about her all the time." Tim replied, "Sure, she's incredibly nice and is married, but that doesn't stop me from noticing how great she looks." "Well, now that you've said that, maybe I wasn't being entirely honest about my thoughts," Andy admitted. The friends laughed together. Andy was nearest when the phone rang, so he picked it up. He told Tim it was the police chief from Karen's hometown, then handed him the phone. "Hello, Chief," Tim said. "I just had a very interesting call from your father-in-law and your wife. I was hoping to receive some information after your last call, so I was really pleased. When she told me everything, along with some extra details, I felt even better. We could possibly charge her with interfering with an investigation, but I'm planning to save that as a backup if needed. Are you okay with that?" Tim answered, "Chief Lewis, I'm fine with however you decide to handle this. I just want those responsible caught, put on trial, and punished. I'm tired of hiding and watching. I'm ready to deal with this once and for all." Chief Lewis responded, "That's quite a way to describe it. You do realize it would be safer if the solution came from law enforcement rather than someone outside, right?" "Of course, Chief," Tim replied, then continued. "But I'm fed up with being threatened and mistreated. Like a cornered animal, I'll only take so much before I fight back. You understand that, right?" "I do. Just make sure you don't act until you really need to. When a big animal goes on the offensive, it can cause a lot of panic. Now get some rest and let me talk to your lawyer for a moment, please." "Here he is, Chief, and good luck," Tim said. "Mr. Robbins, I believe. We haven't met, but my colleagues in Austin and Williamson County hold you in high regard," the chief said with a laugh. "I'm pleased to hear that, Chief. How can I assist you?" Andy asked. "Is there any chance you and his other two lawyers, as well as his new best friend, can help your client see reason? I know of him because I checked his background when he married the mayor's daughter. People say he's a good man, though a bit of a fighter when he or his friends feel wronged. He has plenty of reasons to feel this way now, and I was listening when he spoke to his wife. I can tell he's about to lose control and cause trouble if we don't catch these guys soon. Honestly, I think we'd be looking for their killers instead of them if he hadn't gotten hurt. The best friend you can have and the worst enemy," the sheriff from his home county said, sounding a bit impressed. "Still, my team, the Austin and Cedar Park Police, and even the Texas Rangers feel just as strongly about finding these people as he does. What we don't want is for your client to take matters into his own hands because he's tired of waiting. I understand, Chief. We'll do our best, but as you said, patience isn't the strongest trait of his. The faster we can put them behind bars, the safer everyone will be," Andy replied. The chief assured them they were working as fast as possible and hung up. "Chief thinks you might be about to lose control, as he put it. You aren't, are you? You have to give them time to do their jobs," Andy urged. Tim's frustrated voice came through. "I've been shot. Jeannie has been hurt badly. They tried to harm us both, and now they are threatening my sons, their mother, and her parents. The police can't find them, but they seem to know everything happening in this hospital and at Karen's parents' home. How much longer do they want me to wait? Until they hurt my sons and me? I don't think so. When I get out of here, I'm taking action. The wounded bear has been cornered. It's time to stand and fight." Andy sighed, but he understood his client. There would be no stopping him once he could shift from being hunted to being a hunter. He thought about asking the doctors to keep Tim a few more days, but it was better for Tim to be at the houseman's with his protection, both for himself and Jeannie. Just then, Chet arrived. He greeted Andy and Tim, they shared a hug, and Chet took a seat after Tim settled back into his bed. The friends relaxed and caught up. It turned out Alan and Benton were busy claiming they were innocent to the school board until Andy played the recording from Tim's house. After that, they shouted insults, quit their positions, and stormed out. Their resignations were accepted as soon as the board returned from a break, and they posted notices of the openings. Ward and Hughes were fired for cause. Rogers and Slaughter were also let go for cause, even though they had tried to resign right before the meeting. The board rejected their resignations without hesitation, approved the terminations unanimously, and reported their actions to the Commissioner of Education. The educational paths of all four men were basically over. During a private meeting, they discussed Karen Kelly's situation. However, they hesitated to end her job because it seemed she might have been pushed into her circumstances. The assistant superintendent for finance was made the acting superintendent. Chet was moved from being an assistant principal at the high school to acting principal at the elementary school. He mentioned that he was enjoying the new role and informed Tim that Karen had resigned after he was hurt, citing a family emergency. The acting superintendent accepted her resignation, and a recent UT graduate took her position. There were no plans to take action against her certification. Benton's wife decided to file for divorce, following their agreement that favored her due to his unfaithfulness. Allen's wife, without a prenup, took a similar approach using the same lawyer. Slaughter's wife quit her teaching job immediately and had not been seen or heard from since then. Larry Barnes was suspended from his job with the city of Austin after a warrant was issued because he missed a court date related to accusations of hurting his spouse. Jeannie filed for divorce, but he had not been served papers as no one could locate him. Barnes, Slaughter, Rogers, and Benton were being sought for questioning about Tim's attempted harm. Despite the collaboration of various law enforcement agencies, they had vanished. The Housemans hired a private security service to watch over their home and wanted Tim to come back when he was released. Tim was sharing his thoughts with Andy about why he should return home instead of going to Jimmy and Patty's, but he lost focus when a woman appeared in the doorway. She smiled nervously but smirked when she noticed the surprise on the faces of the two men. Standing confidently in high heels, she posed as if on a runway. Her bright blue dress fit snugly, reaching mid-thigh. The halter top showed off her neck and shoulders. Chet and Andy jumped up to welcome her, offering their chairs. She walked into the room gracefully, greeted Chet and Andy with friendly kisses on their cheeks, and chose to sit on the bed next to Tim, who was left speechless. The woman leaned over to kiss Tim on the cheek, causing Chet and Andy to watch in wide-eyed surprise as she did. "Cat got your tongue?" she asked with a playful smile. After a moment's pause, Tim raised an eyebrow and replied, "Okay, who are you?" She gave him a playful look and said, "Whatever do you mean? I only left a few minutes ago and you've already forgotten me?" Tim looked her over carefully and then replied, "The girl who was here a couple of hours ago in jeans and a sweatshirt is a friend. I've known her for 2 years, but I've never seen her in high heels or red lipstick, and I don't think she has a short blue dress like that. So, who are you?" Andy and Chet jumped in with goofy lines like, "Are you a movie star? And did it hurt when you fell from heaven?" Jeannie smiled but pretended to be annoyed. "Can't a girl wear a dress without getting cheesy compliments from you guys?" "Not when she looks like that," Chet replied, lowering his voice. "Hey there, I'm heading to a steakhouse for dinner, then to a nightclub for some dancing. Wouldn't you like to get out of here and join me for some fun?" Jeannie turned away from the bed, stepped on a stool, and then sat down next to Tim. She was at an angle to Chet and Andy, and as she sat, her dress slipped up a little. She crossed her legs gracefully, which made her dress slide up even more, giving them a view of her white lace beneath. She gave the boys a playful glance before adjusting her dress and turning to Tim. "I have a great offer for my company tonight. Can you beat dinner, drinks, and dancing, or should I go out with Chet?" Tim leaned closer, admiring her. "I don't think they'll let me out to take you dancing, but if you stay, I'll make sure you have a good time. In a few days, your choice tonight will turn out to be worth it." "So I can either take the fun offer right now or a vague suggestion of fun in the future? Can you be more specific?" Jeannie asked. "Lean over and I'll whisper in your ear," Tim said. As he spoke softly to her, Tim touched her leg gently. Andy and Chet watched, a little envious, as Tim's fingers moved playfully while he quietly talked. They noticed her smile and how she laughed softly, then Tim stopped whispering, giving her a gentle nudge with his shoulder. Jeannie looked back to Chet. "Can I take a rain check on that dinner and dancing, Chet? I'd like to go out, but Tim reminded me I promised to keep him company tonight." "I never back out of my promises, so I'll have to decline for now, but maybe another time when Tim is okay." Chet chuckled lightly. He's doing fine, Jeannie. There are plenty of doctors and nurses around, and he's almost ready to go home. Remember, they're releasing him soon. His tone was playful, and his eyes showed he was joking with her. Andy jumped in. What if both of us took you out? It could be a double date to make sure you get to dance all night. We can decide who gets to take you home afterward. Or, Chet added, maybe we could both bring you home and share a goodnight kiss or two. Sounds better than being stuck in a hospital room with a grumpy patient, right? Tim raised his hand behind Jeannie and made a funny gesture, saying loudly, You know they are just trying to charm you, right? You can't trust either of them in a car alone with you, much less both together. They said take you home instead of take you to your home. You can trust me, though. Ignoring Tim, Jeannie replied earnestly, As tempting as your offers are, guys, I'm still recovering, and I think it's best I stay here to rest. Tim will probably fall asleep soon, and then I can rest too. They laughed and shook their heads as they got up to leave. Chet paused and said, Don't let him fool you into thinking he's got kinder motives than us. He's been checking you out at school for 2 years, even when you were in coaching sweats. Imagine what he wants when you wear that lovely blue dress. Tim playfully gestured again, and they all chuckled. Are they right, Tim? Do you have less honorable reasons for wanting to spend time with me? Jeannie asked with a teasing tone and a wide-eyed, innocent look. Tim moved closer to her, gently touching her arm, and replied, Maybe I should ask you the same question. You show up here all dressed up, looking lovely. What are your plans, young lady? Jeannie laughed and said, Patty thought you'd be trying to sneak a peek all evening, but I told her you were more interested in my legs. She smiled and raised her dress slightly, playfully asking, So, do you think I have nice legs? How many times have I not admired your beautiful legs over the past 2 years when you wore shorts, or even your nice school dresses? Plus, you know I think you have the prettiest legs and a lovely figure. Are you asking for compliments? Tim responded. Jeannie smiled at him in a way that made him take notice and lowered her voice to say, I've been worried that you think of me as just a friend. Patty lent me this dress and these shoes, and I came here hoping you'd see a different side of me, not the teacher, not the coach, not the nurse, and not the woman who's been through so much, but a more confident version of myself. I want you to know that there's more to me than anyone at school has seen. She sat on the edge of the bed with her legs gently apart. Even though his shoulder still ached, he moved closer, resting his hand on her leg. He gently touched her skin, letting his fingers explore. He kissed her knee softly, his lips brushing her skin as he tried to ease the weight off his shoulder. He paused for a moment and caught her gaze, his emotions clear in his eyes. Do you think I see you as just a colleague? All I see is someone incredible, someone with so much strength and warmth. You're more than just the roles you play. You have something special inside, like a fire that never dies. He moved her hand closer to him, sharing the connection between them. Although he was in pain, his focus stayed on the quiet understanding and closeness they were sharing. As they sat there together, their closeness grew, and the energy between them became something deeper, more meaningful. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of their breathing, and they continued to sit together, simply appreciating the moment, the connection that spoke louder than words. Jeannie and Tim were lost in the moment, sharing a deep connection that drew them closer. As their emotions intensified, they moved together in perfect rhythm, fully focused on each other. Jeannie felt her heart race as their closeness grew, her body responding to every gentle touch. Tim noticed how connected they felt, but he was careful not to push her beyond what she was comfortable with. He knew how to guide their experience, bringing them to the brink but always pulling back just before it became overwhelming. Their intimacy was built on trust and care. They exchanged a glance, both understanding that they were experiencing something profound. Jeannie felt a wave of emotions wash over her as she trembled in his arms, lost in the intensity of the moment. Her body relaxed, and she felt a sense of release as her energy faded into a calm stillness. Jeannie, catching her breath, felt a twinge of self-consciousness, unsure of what had just happened. "I'm sorry, Tim," she said softly, her face flushed. "I didn't expect that. I've never felt like this before." Tim smiled warmly at her, his eyes filled with reassurance. "It's okay," he whispered. "You don't have to apologize." Jeannie leaned in and kissed him, a gentle gesture of appreciation for the shared experience. Tim, in turn, wrapped his arms around her, making her feel safe and valued. As their quiet moment lingered, Tim tenderly placed his hand on her shoulder, softly rubbing her back, making sure she was comfortable. Jeannie smiled at him, feeling understood and supported, knowing that their bond was something special. They lay there for a while, the world around them quiet and still. Neither of them spoke much, but their closeness said everything that needed to be said. Tim focused on Jeannie as she moved closer to him, expressing her feelings as she neared her peak. She let out a loud sound, her body tensing before relaxing as the moment passed. She gripped his wrist tightly and rested her other hand on his chest. After a moment, she leaned against him, her lower body slipping off the bed, causing her to cry out softly from the overwhelming sensations. Blushing, she quickly pulled away and hurried to the bathroom. After washing up, she returned with a cloth. She cleaned his hands, put on her clothing, and wagged her finger at him. "You, mister, are trouble. You made me faint earlier, and then you didn't stop when I asked. I need to learn how to keep us both in check." Tim smiled at her playful frustration and reached for her leg, but she moved away quickly. "I thought you were going to help me tonight. What changed?" he asked. I'm not sure if I can keep that promise tonight. I still feel a lot, and I worry that if you touch me again, I'll react in a way I can't control. I'm sure everyone in the hospital heard me," she said, laughing nervously. "That will be your punishment for making me react so loudly when you didn't listen to me. Plus, I have to get ready for my classes tomorrow. Some of us have to work." "If you're really leaving, at least come give me a goodnight kiss," he said, pretending to pout. "Only if you keep your hands under the covers. I don't trust you," she said, giving him a playful glare. Tim obeyed, and she leaned over to kiss him, playfully caught off guard when he grabbed her. She struggled briefly, then kissed him back before pulling away with a laugh. "You are so naughty. Good night, and dream of my visit tomorrow after school." "Tease," he said, turning away but smiling as he watched her reflection in the window. She seemed uncertain for a moment, moving closer, then yelped when he turned back to reach for her. It wasn't easy for him, but he enjoyed the playful moment they shared. Sharon smiled awkwardly at Tim's playful tone as she stood near the door, her eyes betraying a mix of amusement and hesitation. She gave him a knowing look and said, "You've got quite the imagination, don't you?" Tim grinned, sensing her reluctance and deciding to ease the tension. "I'm just grateful for all the care you've given me," he said, his voice softer now, trying to lighten the mood. "And maybe I just wanted to make you laugh a little after a long shift." Sharon chuckled softly, relaxing a bit as she stepped closer to check on his vitals. "Well, making people laugh is part of the job too, I suppose," she said, glancing at him with a warm smile. Tim watched as she focused on her task, feeling the comfortable silence between them. "You know, you really take good care of people," he added thoughtfully. "I bet you make a difference in a lot of lives." Sharon paused for a moment, looking at him with a hint of appreciation in her eyes. "Thanks, Tim. That means a lot." She finished checking his vitals and gave him a light pat on the shoulder. "Get some rest. You need it," she said before heading towards the door. Tim nodded, a genuine smile on his face. "I'll try. Thanks, Sharon." With a final glance back, Sharon left the room, leaving Tim alone with his thoughts, grateful for her kindness. The nurse kept her eyes on his face as he touched her, but when he reached for the top of her scrubs to pull them down, she snapped back to reality and stepped away quickly. "No, I can't do this. It's not right, and even if my husband is unfaithful, I'm still married, and so are you, even though—" "My wife is unfaithful?" Tim asked, finishing her thought as a question. Nurse Phillips, who was called Sharon, looked away and said, "Exactly," before leaving the room. Tim smiled as she left and wondered when he would feel better. The physical therapy sessions were becoming harder each day, and this morning was the toughest yet. However, he was still making progress, which made the therapist smile. The therapist praised Tim and said he might recommend him for release, but first he had to promise to attend all his therapy appointments. Tim promised with a big smile and walked back to his room, pushing his walker in front of him. The charge nurse shot him a disapproving look, but the young aide and tech smiled. He waved one hand and joked, I've loved all the care, but I'm ready to leave. I'll never forget you. He walked down the main hallway and turned the corner toward his room. The deputy sheriff guarding him nodded as he passed, and at the end of the corridor, he spotted another officer in a different uniform. As he approached his room, he saw his father-in-law standing in the doorway. He surprised him with a friendly pat on the back and stepped inside. His two young sons jumped off the bed and rushed toward him, while their mother and grandmother called for them to be careful. Tim reached out his arm and lifted the older boy for a hug and a kiss, while his little brother hugged his leg. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away and joyfully welcomed his sons. He set Patrick down and lifted baby Mark next for a hug and kiss. Mark held on tightly, resting his head on Tim's shoulder. "I missed you, Daddy. Can you come home now?" he asked. Patrick chimed in. "Yeah, can you come home and play with us now, Daddy?" "We'll see, boys. The doctor is supposed to visit this afternoon to tell me when I can go. Are you going to stay and have lunch with me? Maybe he will come by after we eat." The boys turned to their mother and asked together, "Are we eating with Daddy?" Tim's gaze shifted to Karen, standing across the room by his bed. He felt a wave of emotion seeing the woman he loved, his wife, and the mother of his dear children. The tear tracks on her cheeks somehow enhanced her remarkable beauty. Her honey-golden hair framed her pretty face, and it fell to her shoulders. She wore a lovely emerald green dress that matched her eyes. She looked just as charming and innocent as she did when they first met. Tim felt a sharp pain in his heart as memories of her betrayal flooded back, and he couldn't help but wince. Karen had been full of joy when he showed her his love, but that joy shifted to sorrow when she saw the hurt in his eyes. "Tim, I'm so sorry," she whispered. Trying to push aside his hurt, he cheerfully responded, "Hi, Karen, how are you? Thanks for bringing the boys to see me here. I know you've been busy, so I appreciate you and your parents making the trip to the hospital." "Hello, Granny. It's great to see you. I hope you're doing well." Patrick tugged on his pant leg and said excitedly, "Daddy, Daddy, our policeman came with us. He keeps watch over our house and goes places with us to keep the bad guys away." Tim looked at his father-in-law and asked, "So, was the drive all right?" His father-in-law replied, "No problems at all. It's nice to see you up and about. Are you healing well?" Tim nodded, saying that he was recovering and that his therapy was going smoothly. He hoped to go home today or tomorrow. Before his father-in-law could speak again, Karen chimed in, "Then can you come home with us today? Mom and I can help take care of you, and the boys would love to be with you." The boys cheered loudly for Daddy to come home, but Tim said, "That sounds like a nice idea, Karen. Let's talk about it a bit later." A nurse peeked into the room and asked if he wanted his meal in his room or in the cafeteria with his family. The boys shouted their choice for him, so he nodded and thanked her. "Boys, why don't you and your grandparents head to the cafeteria and find us a nice table? Mommy and I will be there in a few minutes, all right?" The boys eagerly took their grandparents' hands and hurried down the hall. Tim turned to Karen and said, "I think I'll pass on going home with you. Not for the reasons you might think, but for two important ones. First, my therapy is nearby, and second, while I'm being chased, I don't want to put our sons and your parents at risk. The people looking for me could do anything, including causing trouble at home, do you understand? I don't want to bring any danger closer to you all. We will need to sit down and talk about everything, but right now, I need to focus on my recovery, and we all need to stay safe. We should gently explain things to the boys before you head back to your parents' house. But let's enjoy our lunch first and let them wander a bit. I'm supposed to exercise and walk anyway." Karen's feelings showed clearly on her face as he spoke. She felt scared when he kept her there, sad when he said he wouldn't come home, and a mix of hope and fear when he explained his reasons. But when he promised they would talk soon, a wave of hope filled her heart. She knew she couldn't fight back, but at least he was ready to listen now, or at least soon. That was more than she had hoped for, and it gave her a chance to say she was sorry. Lunch was relaxed and enjoyable, even with the officer watching over them. They strolled around the grounds in the nice spring weather and found a big picnic table to sit at. The boys excitedly told their dad all about what they had been doing, while their grandmother shared a few fun stories about the boys. Gramps asked if he would return to work when he felt better. He replied that he wasn't sure. It depended on whether the people responsible had been caught. Gramps then asked if he could manage the house payments if Karen couldn't go back to work. He said he could. After about an hour and a half, the deputy asked them to start back before traffic got busy, and they agreed, even though it wasn't easy. Tim could see that everyone, including his in-laws, wished to return to a happier time before everything changed, when they were a close family, and he was their favorite son-in-law. He wished them well, shook Gramps' hand, kissed Granny and Karen on the cheek, and hugged and kissed his boys. The deputy responsible for their safety led them away, and Tim noticed another deputy watching him. When he returned inside, he saw that deputy on the phone, looking uneasy as Tim approached. Though it wasn't much, he felt a worry about that call. Feeling tired, he used his walker as he walked down the long hallway back to his room. At the nurse's station, one of the nurses called out to him, directing him to the conference room on the right. He went inside and found his doctor waiting with his file and some papers. Dr. Collins happily told him he would be released at 6 o'clock today as long as he followed the doctor's orders and did his physical therapy as planned. Tim agreed and started signing the papers. As he signed, he noticed his security had briefly disappeared, returning after just a few minutes. Was that just a bathroom break or something else? Tim wasn't sure, but when the doctor left, he asked to stay and use the phone. He immediately called the Texas Ranger assigned to his case and quietly shared his worries, keeping his back to the door. Ranger Boyd listened carefully, then replied, "Well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? It seems like they have been one step ahead of us this whole time, and we were starting to wonder if we had a leak. Let me check into it and I'll get back to you. Do you think you can talk on the phone in your room?" Tim was worried and said if he needed to call, he should let it ring twice and then hang up. He would go to the conference room to return the call. As they were saying goodbye, Ranger Boyd excitedly told Tim to stay on the line. Something important had come up, and he needed to check it before talking to Tim. Tim's heart raced as he heard that someone had tried to push the deputy guarding his family off the road, but the deputy managed to escape. Police in the area were looking for the car the attackers had used, which had stolen license plates. "Tim, I think this shows we were right to be worried. Stay safe, I'll be there in 10 minutes, the ranger advised. Tim felt anger flood his body. He took a deep breath and called the deputy outside into the conference room. "I have some good news for you, Deputy Jackson," Tim said cheerfully, holding the door open with his injured arm. "I'm sure your family will be happy to know you won't have to protect me anymore." As the deputy walked past him, Tim let go of the door and quickly took the deputy's gun from the holster at his side. "But the next few minutes will decide if you see your family again," Tim warned firmly. Tim pointed the gun at the deputy, who stepped back in shock. He froze, fear in his eyes, with his hands raised. "We're going to play 20 questions while we wait for Ranger Boyd. When he arrives, he will either find you here at your desk ready to explain everything, or he will find a far different scene if you try anything funny." "Deputy Jackson, are you ready to answer my questions honestly and completely, or did your family say goodbye for the last time this morning?" Jackson looked pale and confused. He was scared by Tim's words, but still wondered if he could grab the gun back. "No, you can't," Tim replied calmly. Noticing Jackson's uncertainty, he added, "You won't be quick enough before I pull the trigger, so don't even think about it. You can tell I'm ready to shoot, so any movement from you could be deadly." Jackson's shoulders dropped as he accepted his fate. Tim instructed, "Sit down, keep your hands on the desk, palms down, and let's begin." Jackson obeyed, and Tim said, "Answer honestly, completely, and exactly. Now, who are you telling everything to?" "The sheriff," Jackson replied in a flat voice. "What did he ask you to do?" Tim asked. "To watch you and your visitors, listen to what I could, and change the tapes in your room before I left. I took the tapes to him every night." Tim felt only a little surprised that he was being recorded. He wondered where the hidden microphones were and if the phone had one too. Looking back at Jackson, he asked coldly, "How did they know when my wife and kids were leaving and the way they would take home today?" "I was told to call him if they arrived, find out their plans and update him. I talked to another officer about keeping an eye on your family, about how he was going to help them while they traveled home. He shared the route he chose, avoiding the main road until they were past Manor. I called the sheriff and told him what I had learned. Did you know there would be an attempt on their lives after you shared that information? Tim asked, his tone icy. No! The sheriff said he needed to know so he could send extra help. He called me back just before you did. He said someone tried to run the officer off the road and fired shots at them, but the deputy and your family got away safely. Jackson seemed to believe he had done something great by giving that warning, but watching Tim with his family, knowing they were in danger right after he gave the sheriff their route, made Tim doubt everything Jackson had said. The sheriff heard you were being released today, so he wanted me to escort you to the next county, where the other sheriff would take over. I promise, Coach I had no idea what was going on. He told me you were the bad guy, that other officers were wrong. He said you had hurt your wife and threatened some people when they tried to help, and they shot you to protect themselves. With what I know now about you, your family, and your friends, that doesn't make sense. I know you won't trust me now, but I plan to talk to the task force leader from Cedar Park tonight, get his side, and then tell him I've been watching you for the sheriff. Tim heard Ranger Boyd asking the nurses where he was. He quickly returned the revolver to Officer Jackson, told him to put it away, and took a seat. Jackson looked shocked until Tim greeted the ranger, saying, Jim, Officer Jackson has something he'd like to share with you. He already told me, and it confirms our suspicions. Tim listened as the officers discussed the sheriff's orders, explained where the recording devices were, how Collins justified taping Tim, and talking about the officer who worked the night shift. Boyd asked Jackson why he was given this duty. Jackson replied that he didn't know, but it was the best job he had since joining over a year ago. For the last 9 months, he had been working night patrol in the eastern part of the county, even though he lived west of Cedar Park near Jonestown. Boyd asked if Jackson ever suspected the sheriff of anything. Jackson scoffed, shook his head, and said, Yeah, he just seems shady. My dad and grandfather were sheriffs in West Texas, so I grew up around police work. When I applied, my dad warned me about his reputation, but my wife grew up near Lake Travis, and all her family is around Jonestown, so I took the job. 2 months later, at the department Christmas party, the sheriff made advances on my wife right in front of his own. In January, I was given a new duty with the night shift around Taylor. My wife was unhappy about me being gone 4 nights a week, but I told her it would only be for 6 months while I got settled. She still acts like she's always angry with me, and our marriage is barely hanging on. I blame that sheriff, and now that I know he's not honest, I'll do anything I can to help bring him down. I'm sure he used the information I provided to set up the attack on Coach Kelly's family. Tim was listening closely, but part of his mind was on a movie he had yet to watch. Just then, the ranger turned back to him to speak. Tim interrupted. Officer Jackson, do you know any of the men who tried to harm me? He named all of them. Jackson shook his head until he reached the name Barry Benton. His face turned red and he exclaimed, Yes, I know that guy. He's one of the sheriff's friends, and he has made passes at my wife too. Yes, I think my wife is beautiful, but his wife is stunning. Why would he be after my Jennifer? Tim and the ranger exchanged glances. Tim raised his eyebrows in question. I don't want to make it difficult, he began. But Boyd nodded, and they returned their focus to Jackson. There's a chance we might be able to help you, but you will need to come with me to another place after I'm free. I have something I want you to see, and then we can talk more. Boyd told Tim he needed to call his wife or her family now that they were back home. When Karen answered, she said, Are you guys all right? Tim asked, Are you okay? Karen started crying and replied, No, we are not okay. None of us are hurt, but we're scared again. Tim, the driver was JW and the shooter was Larry. You need to come here, stay with us, and protect us. Maybe I will, Karen, but right now I have an important question for you. We might have a lead that could help us finish this quickly. What you tell us is very important, so think carefully before you answer. Did the sheriff from Williamson County ever take part in your gatherings at the lake? Karen paused for a moment before answering. I hesitate to say because it shows my past mistakes, but yes, he came, twice, and he brought a young girl with him. I think her name was Jennifer Johnson. She seemed even more scared than I was. She said her husband was a deputy, and the sheriff told her that if she did not follow his orders, her husband and family would be in danger. I refused to go along with what they wanted us to do, hoping it would help us both. But the sheriff warned me that my kids and husband might also be in trouble if we didn't comply. She urged me to just go along with it, saying the sheriff was a powerful and dangerous man. What did they want you to do, and did you go through with it? Tim asked. Karen took another moment of silence before she replied. They wanted us to act in a scene together. They filmed it, and then the sheriff forced the girl to do things with some of the others. After that, they took her away, and the others took me home. Tim covered the phone and told Ranger Boyd, "It sounds like that might be the tape titled JJ and KK. Then, with a sigh, he said, "Are there more? You need to tell us everything, Karen. Our lives and the lives of our families might depend on it. Please stop giving us bits and pieces. I'm putting Ranger Boyd on the line so you don't have to tell me directly, but please share everything with him." Tim passed the phone to Boyd and moved his chair to sit beside the deputy. He asked, "What's your first name? I don't think we've been introduced, at least not clearly." The deputy extended his hand, shook it, and replied, Randy Jackson. So my wife Jennifer is the one you mentioned with your wife? She's involved in this too?" "I can show you the start of a video to confirm," Tim offered. Randy sighed, closed his eyes, and quietly said, "Not really, but I have to see. Will it ruin my marriage?" "You'll have to think about her actions and what led to them. Karen said the sheriff threatened to cause harm to you and your daughter if she didn't obey. Since he's your boss, she might have believed he could carry out those threats. What they were doing was very wrong. They were taking advantage of women and forcing them into situations in front of cameras. Yes, these men thought they were something they truly were not." The sheriff, along with his friend Barry Benton, had been involved with both my wife, Karen, and a woman named Jennifer. I managed to get some videos from a source I won't reveal. I have control over them now. If you're interested, I can show you one tape labeled Jennifer J and another marked JJKK. Let's hope neither one features your wife. Boyd had just finished his call with Karen and was listening to the last part. "Deputy, the Jennifer in the tapes is described as a slender brunette, 5'9" tall with long hair and olive skin, but she has bright blue eyes." He paused when he noticed the wave of sadness on Jackson's face and said, "Well, that's surprising. Randy, we need to come up with a plan to take down your sheriff and see that he faces consequences, along with the 4 people who tried to harm us. Do you have any ideas on how we can do that?" Tim asked. Jackson's sadness turned into anger as he looked at Boyd and Kelly. "I might have a plan, but it carries a high risk for us. It depends on Ranger Boyd and whoever he can rely on. This plan follows his instructions to me. Take Coach home in my truck. If he's going to Travis County, a deputy should meet us there. I have to let them know a few hours before we leave so they can ensure our safety, and then take the route he gave me. It's a back road, and I have a bad feeling something will go wrong there that could be deadly, but I'm unsure how. If we follow those orders, Ranger Boyd, how can we make sure we stay safe?" Boyd told Jackson and Kelly to prepare whatever they needed while he called his captain. After about 10 minutes, he asked them what they required and reported back to the captain. He informed them that their supplies would arrive within the hour. Tim leaned forward, looking directly at Randy. "Are you certain you want to go through with this? They want me, not you. I can drive home on my own, and you and the Rangers can help out. You don't have to risk it with me." "Coach, I believe the sheriff wants both of us out of the picture. Either way, I'm committed to doing my job and getting you home safely. If we stick together, we stand a better chance, more eyes, more help. Assuming you know how to handle a gun, can you?" Tim smiled, raising an eyebrow in a playful manner. Ranger Boyd agreed, and they began to set their plan in motion. A wiretap on the sheriff's phone was set up, and following that, Deputy Jackson made a call to him to set the trap. According to the Rangers' plan, they would leave for Tim's home at 5 p.m., giving the Rangers enough time to prepare and get into position. It also gave the sheriff time to plan the ambush with his helpers, which was part of the strategy. Getting permission for the wiretap took some convincing because it was on the phone of an elected law officer, but it turned out to be very important. Randy was correct. The sheriff wanted him and Tim gone because they aimed to use Jennifer and Karen to entertain more elected officials and make more films to sell to the highest bidder. The leaders in Austin debated whether they had enough evidence to arrest or if they needed to catch the other criminals in the act of plotting harm. Tim worried that the criminals still free Robertson, Sauer, Benton, Barnes, and Hughes would escape if they just arrested the sheriff. He insisted they follow through with the plan. His argument won the day, and they left the parking lot well prepared and alert right at 4 p.m. Before they set out, the ranger made Tim a temporary officer for safety on the trip. They expected an ambush along the winding and quiet back road, but just before reaching Cedar Park, a helicopter reported that a large pickup truck had started moving on a side road when they came into view, now hidden behind some bushes near the highway. They could either shoot from their hiding place or try to block the deputy's vehicle at the intersection. The truck was on their right, so Tim turned to the side in his seat to aim his semi-automatic rifle out the passenger window. He kept the rifle inside the car, with the barrel ready to shoot through the open window. Even though his injured arm was in pain, he pushed it aside and focused on the threat ahead. They sprang into action. They rushed out in a big truck with a strong front guard, and the passenger in the back seat started shooting at Tim and Randy as they broke from cover. Randy hit the brakes hard and swerved left to give Tim a better shot. Tim fired at the truck, aiming for the driver. The truck swerved right and ended up in a ditch across the road, but managed to turn and drive away. As he aimed his rifle at the fleeing truck, Tim recognized J.W. was driving and saw Sauer in the passenger seat. The gunman ducked inside when bullets hit the truck, but Tim and Randy caught a glimpse of Barnes. The truck raced off and turned right a little further down the road. Randy backed up to the intersection and made a sharp turn before speeding after them. The helicopter warned that backup would arrive in 5 minutes and advised them not to engage until help was there. In just a minute, the helicopter reported that the truck was parked at a shopping center near Highway 620. Then they heard, "Oh no! They have guns and are shooting at us! Pulling back! Pulling back!" Randy quickly drove to the back of the shopping center. They got out of the vehicle, each carrying a shotgun and another type of gun, and moved around the side. They saw the truck parked in the middle of the lot, but there was no one around. A police car with 2 officers arrived from the other side, blocking the exit, and they took cover behind their car. Another ranger arrived, followed by another police car with 2 local officers. They joined Randy and Tim, warning them to stay back as they moved through the parking lot toward the truck. They confirmed it was empty and began a careful search of the 30 or so other cars in the lot. Randy rushed into the nearest store and asked if anyone had seen the people from the truck shooting at the helicopter. He found out that all 6 people in the store had witnessed the event. They excitedly explained how the 5 men split up, with 2 getting into a black pickup and the other 3 into a dark Mercedes. Randy hurried back to his car and radioed this information, asking for a bulletin on the vehicles and warning that they should be considered dangerous. Tim stood outside, shaking with anger. Those guys had gotten away again. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.